Ready, Pete? Yep. All right. All right, this meeting is called to order for the Medfield Board of Selectmen for Wednesday, August 25th, 2021. As always, our meetings are being video recorded, and we will begin by taking a moment of appreciation for our troops serving around the globe in defense of our country, and in particular those who are in Afghanistan at the moment, facilitating the evacuation of Americans and our allies from that country. Thank you. As always, for those of you who are in Zoom world, if you wish to comment or be recognized, please just put yourself in the Q&A and note that you'd like to be promoted. I don't always notice the little hand raise feature, so if you wouldn't mind just putting your name and address in the Q&A. If you'd like to be promoted, you're also welcome to comment just via the Q&A, and we'll read your comment and hopefully address whatever your question is that way. And for our many guests who are here today, you can just be recognized through a normal human interactions of getting our attention. So great to have everyone here, if we remember how to do that. So we're going to go through our agenda, and then it's scheduled on our agenda at 7 o'clock to meet with the Warrant Committee Elementary School Project Subcommittee. We'll do that at the end of the rest of our agenda. So it might be optimistic to think it'll be 7 o'clock, but it won't be before 7 o'clock. So if we somehow finish before 7, we'll have to filibuster until 7 to start talking to the Warrant Committee Subcommittee. All right, so we have our first appointment is with the Medfield Energy Committee to discuss the Climate Action Plan and request Board of Selectmen approval for use of town funds. Someone going to speak? Fred.
It's great to be here in person. First time I've been in this room in Town Hall for a while, so it's great to be back. Thanks, Selectmen, for having us. The Energy Committee, we think, doesn't need to take up too much of your time tonight. We appreciate going first also. Thank you for that. So what we're doing tonight is two things. Hilly is going to, and by the way, we have been hoping to get here in the last month or two, so it's good that we're here tonight. Hilly is going to start out with an update on what we're calling TOMCAP, Town of Medfield Climate Action Plan. So that's the TOMCAP report, the status, and where we're at with that, with the goal of getting that written by March. Megan is following with coming to you for a request for a smaller amount of funds for ongoing outreach and engagement from the Energy Committee. Something I don't think, I've been on the Energy Committee for 13 years, all of its 13 years. I don't remember that we've ever asked for funds before. So, as I said, we'll try to make it brief.
Thank you for having me. Do we have slides?
Nick ready? Nick is ready. I said that, but I really don't know if Nick's ready. So now Nick's ready.
Welcome, Hilly. How are you?
Good, thank you.
Good. All right, we have slides.
So thank you for having me. I'm happy to be able to present to you the progress of the Town of Medfield Climate Action Plan Work Group, a subgroup of the Medfield Energy Committee. Can you move that forward, please? Is that? Okay. The back one. So as you can see in the timeline that was in your packet, we are making great progress. We're very happy that we have good momentum, and
That was me, sorry.
in the 3 months since the town meeting, we have held a number of meetings, put together a great work group, and we now have a robust calendar going into the fall. Our work group has 10 core members and includes members from the Energy Committee, one of the Selectmen, Peterson, and community members. We meet every 2 weeks to make sure that we maintain the momentum going forward. And in the weeks after the town meeting, just give me Okay, thank you. Is that better?
It should be. It's much closer to your face.
Okay. So I just want to point out that we are just 3 months into the planning process, and what I present to you is really the summary of those 3 months, and we're very happy with the progress we've made so far. In the weeks after the town meeting and the approval of the resolution, we introduced the work group to you in a letter, and we met with the town administration and held a public forum introducing the problem, the plan to the public, and I know that you were there and had some great questions for us. We have since that forum included experts from the EEA and from other towns, and we have since networked across Massachusetts and have received guidance from experts both during our meetings and outside our meetings. We have also acquired a template climate action plans from towns that are very similar to Medfield, and we have met with community groups to introduce ourselves and invite them to participate in the process. If you could have the next slide, Nick, please. MAPC has published a net zero planning playbook for municipalities to use, and these are the core action steps that they suggest that the towns follow. One is to recruit community support, one is to pursue commitment of the town, then prioritize holistic planning, and finally gather necessary information. I would like to walk you through where we have already made progress. If we could have the next slide, please. We have definitely recruited community support both before and after the town meeting. We have community involvement actively in our work groups, and we saw during the town meeting that there was overwhelming support for the net zero goal from Midfield. Next slide, please. In terms of pursuing commitment, that is the resolution and the call to make an action plan itself. The town is committed to following the state goal, and I consider that a major achievement in our progress. And finally, in terms of the next slide, please. Gathering necessary information. A major part of that is to make a greenhouse gas inventory for Medfield. The Medfield Energy Committee has done that. And if we could have the next slide, please. This is what the baseline emissions inventory for Medfield looks like. I hope you can see that on your computer. Not surprisingly, if you look across Massachusetts, the vast majority of emissions come from private homes and private vehicles, about 40% in each category. So we very much feel those are going to be the main areas that we can make a quick difference and not change the lifestyle of the people too much. Do you have any questions for the inventory before I go on?
I guess one, Hilly, because the private residents and the passenger vehicles are the largest components, I don't think I understood your last sentence, which was we can make changes without affecting people's lifestyle very much.
Oh, that
So
is, yeah,
help me
I know.
understand that.
That is a very common concern and actually a misconception. Just this 2 days ago, the British government actually published a report saying that we can achieve net zero if we adopt electric vehicles, electric heat, and clean energy, and some, increases in efficiency without major lifestyle changes, including a minor reduction in flights. And that is because if we choose an electric vehicle, we can still drive. If we heat our homes with heat pumps and solar energy, we can still heat our homes and cool them. It's not going to have a major impact on our lifestyles.
So just in the interest of the conversation, I would challenge that because that completely ignores the economic impacts that doing those things are. The mere fact that we can maintain a lifestyle without tying it into the actual financial implications of that lifestyle, which has probably more to do with timing and distribution of costs than it has of some impossible point that we could never get to in 1,000 years. Now, having said that, what I've heard from the Energy Committee up till now, primarily through Jim Dale, is that your strategy is to make sure that people at the point in time when they are looking to make a change are informed and are better prepared to make an informed change that will point us in the right direction. The reason I'm bringing this
Absolutely.
up is because that's what I've heard from the committee, and I think that's a crucial
Absolutely.
aspect of this that would in fact make it possible to have something like this change without radically affecting people's lifestyle.
Yes, and that is actually what the state plan calls the natural points of transition. As your equipment comes to a natural end of lifespan, say 15 years for your heating or a car, that then you make the next choice. But I do think that when you talk about the economic aspect of it, I do think that in terms of electric cars, there is an inflection point right now that we will really see a major change in the next 5 years. And I think, we all should prepare for that in terms of, finding the right infrastructure and allowing people of all economic levels to participate in that. And housing will be a little bit more work, but we have the state support and a plan and the technology to do it. Any other questions? If you could give me the next slide then. So the structure of the TOMCAP that we decided on focuses on 5 primary actions of sort of specific goals, which is renewable energy, transportation, housing, natural resources, and waste. And overarching all of those is governance and environmental justice. And I'm happy to say that we have assigned most of these areas also either people that work with us or an advisory group that will help us deal with this. For example, we have met with TSARC and they're willing to look at our waste part. We have the UCC pastor who's going to work with a food cupboard and Medfield outreach to look at environmental justice issues and advise us on that. And those are just 2 of our starting points. Do you have any questions on that?
Yeah. Environmental justice issues in Medfield.
Mm-hmm.
Give me an example.
Well, the example that springs to mind with me right now is, remember how I said the cars are at an inflection point, they're electric vehicles.
Mm-hmm.
It is very clear from the economics right now that maintenance of those cars is cheaper, and going forward in just a few years, less than 5 years, they will be cheaper than internal combustion engine cars. So it is important that people of lesser means will also be able to drive them. So if you are in multifamily housing, a renter, a condo, there has to be access to charging. And that is a big, even in Medfield, a big environmental justice issue that we need to address, either in working collaboratively with the landlords or through governance, whatever solution we find. I think that is an important issue because most people can just plug their car in their garage. Even with a level 1, it's no expense at all. But if you only have a parking spot in a public, in a sort of lot of a multifamily housing, this might be very difficult. And that needs to be addressed because, electric cars are and will be cheaper than gas cars.
So even like at the current, basically everyone would be better off with those cheaper cars than they are now with the cars that they're dealing with.
Especially if you take into account the natural points of transition that we talked about earlier.
Okay, this is, again, in the spirit of a conversation, not...
Right. But that was just an example that...
Personally, I'm skeptical that
I know, and
the long-term solution for electric cars is going to be to basically create a gas station-like infrastructure that suddenly we're gonna switch over, we're gonna have charging stations instead of gas stations. I personally, this is speculation, I think it's gonna be a Blue Rhino model where you pull out a standard battery, it's traded in, and so we don't deal with the charging times, we don't deal with distributed, charging stations everywhere. So and this is really off topic here, but my point.
You
the
said
point-
it, not me, Gus, but go ahead.
Yeah. The point
No,
that-
I love
but
this.
The reason I raise it as a point is that as we make decisions about where we need to go, we need to recognize that some of those decisions are working off technology assumptions, and we should be sure that those technology assumptions are going to still make sense 20 years from now. That's one in particular, to me, doesn't make sense. We have to figure out how to get to standardized batteries so that a charging station is not literally plug your car in and wait 20 minutes. It's pull out the standard battery, put in the new battery, and drive off. And so there's a charging station there, but it's more of a production facility than that's my guess.
Yeah, my vision is slightly different. Most people probably just need a charging station at their home or wherever they are, because you'll have not much change of range than what you have now, 200, 300, 400 miles going forward, most people only drive like 30 or 40 miles a day to work and back. What you vision as the charging infrastructure is really distributed. You will find that at your 7-Eleven, your Dunkin' Donuts. You have a coffee. In those 15 minutes, you get, in 30 minutes, you get about 80% charge with the direct current charging stations that are these businesses put in now. And so
We'll have to have a conversation in 20 years.
I'll invite you.
Tilly, what was that retail chain that was going to put in?
It's 7-Eleven just said
7-Eleven.
they're just putting in
What's gotten me on this
tens
is-
of thousands.
What's gotten me started on this is reading articles by the president of Toyota, who's basically saying, and the
Yeah.
number one electric vehicle manufacturer in the world, saying there's no way we're going to be able to get there because the infrastructure won't be able to be put in place. And so it's not that I know, it's that I read this stuff,
Yeah.
and it's like, that makes sense, and there's no reason why that needs to be a constraint if we rethink how we recharge vehicles.
Yeah, I think regionally also you have to understand that Massachusetts is really pretty thickly settled with public charging stations. You can really drive across Massachusetts with no problem. Should also be aware that Toyota is having other issues and is starting to lobby against electric cars because of competition issues. Yeah.
Anyway, I recognize it as a little
I'm sorry.
getting off the.
I know. I warned you about, taking 2 hours. So any other questions about our basic structure? All right. So we obviously have a major part of our work as public outreach to engage the public and give them an opportunity to get informed, get involved, give comments. And so we'll be participating in the Energy Committee's booth at Medfield Day. And I think Megan will talk about this a little bit. And the last thing I wanted to point out that obviously working with the town administration is important for us and for the town. And Christine invited us for the next department head meeting in September. And what you have in your packet is the kind of letter that we would be sending out to the heads of department and committees to introduce ourselves and ask for time during their meetings. We just wanted to run that by you.
Sorry, I have comments on that too.
Okay.
I have a reputation, certainly with Christine and Nick, for being the editor of all minutes. Almost nothing gets through with, yeah, that sounds good. So once again, the spirit of this is editorial and it is advice. You can ignore it. Okay,
I-
there's two things that I would point out as I read it that I reacted to. The first part, in the first paragraph, says, with the passage of warrant Article 22 at town meeting, Medfield has adopted the strategic goal of reaching net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. That was not, in fact, what we did. It was first off a non-binding resolution, so we have not adopted any goals whatsoever. And the reason I'm being very, very clear about this is my position at the town meeting was, if the town wishes to adopt a goal, it needs to understand the implications. So everything you're doing is the stuff that I think needs to be done before you really go to the town and ask for a true commitment to a goal. And so I'm being a little precise about the fact we have not adopted a strategic goal. We have basically affirmed our support of the state's goal of trying to achieve or achieving net zero by 2050. I understand it's a subtle difference, but we haven't adopted a strategic goal. So to the extent you don't want to misrepresent something to people you're talking to, I would consider not wording it quite that way. And then the only other thing was on the last paragraph, you talked about informing, said department heads and relevant staff to inform about the state and federal efforts. I like what you're doing, but it seems to me what you want there is to have a discussion.
Absolutely.
So as opposed to, we're going to inform you about what the state is doing, as opposed to, we want to have a discussion about what the state's doing so we can have a conversation with you about what the departments can do. It's purely editorial, it's purely advice. You can ignore all of it if you'd like.
I think this, obviously these will be longer discussions and ongoing discussions with all of them. But I do think that it is, given how strongly we network, I think we can help some of the departments access funds that they haven't thought about and aren't aware of.
Mhm.
That's good.
Good work.
So I think that was about it. And as Fred said, we're still planning to have a plan to be ready in March. And I think what I'd really like you to be aware of is that it's going to be an evergreen plan that needs constant updates as to the urgency, possibilities, technological and financial opportunities. So it's not a static plan. Thank you.
Thanks, Ellen.
Thank you.
Right, my turn. I am also happy to be here. I think the last time we were here in person was in February or March of 2020, where we were here together, and I think you'd agree that, since then, our committee has really kind of gotten engaged and really energetic, and we've accomplished a lot. And the actions and productivity of our volunteers have paid off. I don't know if you remember, but at that meeting we came and Fred talked about what he was, the Energy Committee was planning, which was community choice aggregation. Wouldn't it be great if we could set a goal for net zero? How about we fund a sustainability coordinator? So it's really exciting to be here and be talking about all these things that we have accomplished. So really, Fred, thank you for leading us to that, but you guys also for your support, Christine, the administration, it's really been great. So as our committee moved through town meeting, right, we were really focused on that, but now we've come to the place where we want to continue to work on initiatives like the TomCap and bringing education to the residents of Medfield. But we feel like we should be spending more time at this point reaching out to the community and engaging them both for input, things like TomCap, as well as educating them. So as you probably know, outreach is part of what the Energy Committee would like to do. So tonight we're specifically asking for support of these outreach initiatives and the ability to use town funds for them. In particular, we're planning for an impactful presence at Medfield Day and looking ahead to a few other outreach programs later in the year. So we're here tonight because while some other committees in town that perform outreach, such as the Transfer Station Recycling Committee, the Health Department, the Planning Board last year who had presences at Medfield Day, they have departments that they turn to for that sort of thing. But the Energy Committee, we kind of feel like we're a little orphaned without a department behind us to turn to who might have a big budget that could squeeze in a little bit of resources for us. So that's why we're here. asking for your support. I think that you will see that our outreach program has a really modest request. It's $1,300, is what we're hoping that you will, let us move forward with and engage the community. The big part of it, or not the big part of it, one part of it, about $500, are first-time expenses, because we've never made an energy committee poster. We've never made a, poster boards to have out at Medfield Day. So I think that with this and all the work that our committee is doing, we just really want to keep the momentum up, be there at Medfield Day where we can engage most of the community. And we think that this is a great way to do that, and we hope that you'll support us and our initiatives. Do you have any questions?
Pete?
I don't, no.
Gus?
Is the outreach we're talking about here is the broad outreach for what the Energy Committee does across the board?
It is, yes. Well, we think that the Energy Committee is, broadly charged with outreach, and the things that we're going to plan to do at Medfield Day include talking about electric vehicles in particular, and then also we are going to have something about TomCap. There will be a part of the booth that we devote to that, because Hilly would like the community to know that we're working on this, engage them, find a way to get their people who'd like to be involved, get their feedback, that sort of thing.
The reason I asked the question is when the article that was voted on was promoted, one of the points that was made is we are not asking for any money, and so I'm sensitive to that. That's why I asked the question, because I can see how a outreach program for the Energy Committee designed to inform, to educate the public about all of the issues that you're talking about. I can see how that makes sense. It would actually seems, and letting people know what TomCap, what you're doing and where you're going and what the opportunities for development, I can see that too.
Yeah.
In terms of promoting the output, it's too early for that, so that's.
Right, but we'd love involvement.
Okay, that's my only question.
And where is this money proposed to come from? I mean, since it wasn't in the budget for this year.
That is a great question.
Ah,
But where?
Looking at me to find the money within our existing budgets.
Would that qualify for the economic, the budget that we have at our discretion?
I don't know. I don't think so.
I don't think so. But I have,
You mean the Economic Vitality Fund?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
to Kelly's point, some of this really will actually leave people better off. I'll quibble over issues with you, but some of this really will make a difference. Even solar panels, to the extent we can decentralize our electric power grid, that's actually a really good thing for our society. So in the big picture, some of these things really do help. Educating, I guess I'm using a broad definition of economic vitality when I say, well, if you educate town residents to make more informed decisions that really are in their best interest, I could kind of get to economic. If you were asking for 13,000, we wouldn't even be having this conversation, but for what you're asking for, I'm quite happy to say, if we don't think it qualifies, I'm okay with that, but I wanted to ask the question anyway.
Yeah, I don't know that it would. I mean, I think the way that article is written for that, I mean, unless they have, they're going to set up it next to a restaurant or something, and people will come eat at the restaurant in order to gain access to the materials, which is probably something of a stretch. I mean, the purpose of that fund is really to promote business and get people to come to town and all the rest of it. And so, particularly given that the warrant committee is always trying to turn that down to zero every year, I think if we start spending on this sort of stuff, it would be more fodder for
But
the
that's only because we don't use it
opponents,
much.
the opponents of economic vitality that exist on the warrant committee. But-
See, the lesson I took was the lesson I took from that was you don't want to leave any in it, so then we can have the.
Right, well, so I mean, I don't know if we have, if there is some amount that could be legitimately within what's already adopted in the budget, repurposed, I don't see anything wrong with this. As long as it's not something that's going to be diverted away from money that's already appropriated in the budget that was put through the ordinary budgeting process.
yeah, so you actually, in the Board of Selectmen's budget, you have a line item for other committee expenses, and we typically use it for the warrant committee since they reduced their budget to zero. They now raid your budget, something to think about when we talk about economic vitality fund next year. And we also use it for the Lyme Disease Study Committee and our beaver control issues. So we can pull it out of there, and then we can see how the year goes.
We might just have to have Fred chase down some beavers, though.
Yeah, I may
if
need to tell
that
him.
Is that an okay deal for the Energy Committee to take over
Fine
beaver
with me.
trapping? You can
No,
go-
no,
you
if Fred
Oh,
does
for
it.
Fred to do it, okay.
That's fine with me.
I think a beaver fur hat, probably you can turn your thermostat down about 2 degrees if you have those.
Yeah, so I don't have any issue with this request. You know, obviously, the impact of it depends on the quality of the educational materials, and that's up to you all. But as long as it's not going to impinge on something else we've already planned, I have no issue with this.
I'm fine with it too, and I would even allow it to come out of the economic development monies that Gus was suggesting.
I was just asking. I wasn't.
I feel more comfortable that came out of the other committee expenses.
Yeah, that's, if it's
Especially
there,
with the
that's
warrant
great.
committee in the back row.
Good, well, thank you very much for your support.
We need a motion, or?
I think we need a motion, right?
A motion, please.
So I move that we approve $1,300 for education and outreach expenses for the Medfield Energy Committee, source of which to be determined by Christine Trueweiler, coming out of our existing budgets.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None. All right.
Now I will thank you for your
You
support. Thank you. I think it's great too, both to hear like that you are supportive of us to, get engaged with the departments in town and really try to figure out how we're going to do this, as well as outreach to the community. So thank you.
Thank you. Both are important, so.
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you all. And thank you, Nick, for taking, I was just going to tell Nick to take it down so I can see everybody else. All right, next we have Mr. Nickerson requesting use of the Medfield State Hospital property for flight training. This is a new one, so I think I see Mr. Nickerson there, and we will promote David Nickerson.
Unmute. New to this. Hey.
Hello.
Oh, there we are. Thank you all for having me. Oh boy, I don't know where to start here. Hilly kind of set the bar.
Why don't you tell us who you are and why you're here?
Gotcha. Yes, my name's David Nickerson. I fly paramotors. Paramotors are those butt fan things you've seen flying over and around town here and there. I trained 3 years ago to learn to fly these things down in Central Florida, and it's been absolutely life-changing for me. More life change came when COVID hit, and I ended up going down to Central Florida, where I learned to fly, and left my event production business up here because COVID, and I snowbirded for the first time at 49 years old in Central Florida, teaching people to fly. It got to be May down there. I came back north, and I just when I learned to fly, one of the first places I flew after training was at Hospital Hill in Medfield. We had met a fella named Dick Judge, who my understanding was Dick Judge had some role in giving us an okay to use the field across from the hospital there. I've later learned that he didn't have any position for that. So yeah, we've got a bunch of people that just go out and fly for fun. Since then, I became an instructor down in Florida, and I've been just basically sharing my love of flight with people locally, local fields. I bought a tandem trike, which is a way that I can take other people up for flights and really introduce them to what it is we do. I practice this with my girlfriend's 7-year-old son. I'd love to share a little clip that my buddy Buzz made, if that's okay to put on screen here to show you a little bit of what we do. Buzz's mother was coming up to visit from New Jersey, his 88-year-old mother. And Buzz is, I think he's 5 years on me, 55. And Buzz has been flying a year more than me. And he's the local guy I connected with when I got up here, and I'd love to throw that on if that's okay.
His last name isn't Lightyear, is it?
No, it's Buzz Burrows, actually.
How long is the
Right.
clip?
It's 2 minutes and 20 seconds. I can cut it out at any point, but
Well, why don't you give
it's,
us about a minute? We'll probably get the gist of it, I think.
all right, let me try this
I
share
think we've all seen
screen
these
button.
things, but
Yes, we're going to put it in the best light we can here. Share sound, optimize for video clip, click share, and that's this screen. Bear with me. Here we go. And click play. This is Buzzfoot launching.
Selfie stick. On your mark. Get set. Call it. Go.
I think we got the picture there. Thank you.
All right. Just a little teaser. How do I stop this now? Bear with me. Stop it. There we are. That's the basics of what we do. Some of the guys I fly with had, going further in here, had met Mr. John Thomas across the street. And John, I understood, was the next guy that we thought had authority to say what was what. We thought was his field. And we got the basics from John was don't fly over our buildings. And we teach not to do that anyway. We got a very limited set of rules that govern from the FAA what we can do. But the biggest issue we have is good places to fly from. Flying from good ground is a real challenge. So when I came back this spring, I headed up to my favorite flying spot, Medfield's Hill there, the Hospital Hill. And it was real overgrown, and I remembered it would always be pretty well cut and well taken care of. And I know Dick had said there were some guys that would take care of it here and there, and I found it wasn't cut, and I wasn't thinking to pull one over on anybody, but I brought my lawnmower from my mother's house. I brought it over and I started cutting the grass there and started trying to take care of the field. As you saw in some of those, we cut it to where it was a pretty good area where I had seen it cut in the past. And I thought all was great until one day I was at the field and I started chatting up a woman in her car having her lunch midday, and it was Sarah, the town planner, who said, "You need to talk to Christine." So I headed down to town hall, met Christine, and she hooked me up with you guys. And I'm not trying to pull one over on anybody. I do just what you saw there. I do bring some friends down, teach them the basics of how to kite a wing, how to work a glider. For me, this is more a labor of love than anything else. I'm paid to teach in Florida. I go back in late October, and I'll stay until it gets hot again. But I'd love to find a way where I could help to make sure we're able to preserve this spot. I did feel out with a landscaper I saw across the street when I saw someone cutting over that area that they run the movies at. And I just wanted to make sure I wasn't stepping on anybody's toes. I talked with this guy, and I said I wanted to make sure I wasn't taking money off anybody's, plate. And he said that the field, this was just before I met Sarah, he mentioned that the field was being maintained by a couple of brothers who had taken their lives, and they were in trade for haying the field or something. I don't know more than what he told me.
Right.
But
so it sounds just all right. So it sounds like you are looking for a permit to take off and land from where? Because if you can't fly on Medfield, is it the hospital or is it McCarthy Park or sledding
Yeah,
hill?
we've been using the top of the field across from the main entrance, across from that office building, that office
Top of the
trailer,
sledding hill?
across from the main
sledding
entrance
hill?
for the hospital there.
Yeah.
It's often been overgrown, but basically just looking to keep running into the sky from that field. I'd love to get an okay to keep running a lawnmower there in a perfect world. That trike that you saw me taking up Buzz's mother, and we need a little bit of grass to make that a good launch. We can foot launch in just a little bit, but when I heard there was some talk that the selectmen would want to see me about this, I just wanted to roll with what Christine said and just get in front of it, make sure we're okay. I just love to figure out a way we can, now that I know it's not Mr. Judge or it's not Mr. Thomas that managed that field right there, I'd love to figure out how we can make sure we stay in good graces. We have a very limited set of rules from the FAA that they don't want to do anything that governs what we do. We're considered ultralight. They call us ultralight vehicles, not even ultralight aircraft.
All right, let me stop you there for 1 second. And Mark Sorrell, our town council, is here as well.
Sure.
So before we get into substantive questions to Mr. Nickerson, I mean, we have a variety of categories for licenses that we issue and for a variety of activities that were covered by our insurance if they go on town property, which this is. And so my first question to Mr. Sorrell is, what category does this fall into?
Short answer is I don't know. It's pretty unique. I think you'd have to confer with Meyer and determine whether it falls within a coverage or an exclusion.
Christine, do you?
We actually don't have Maya for insurance on this. We had to go to the outside market and bring a vendor in for insurance, and this is not going to be covered under that.
Okay.
At any rate, you'd have to confer with whoever issues a policy then and determine whether it's within coverage or an exemption or exclusion.
I mean, it
I'm
sounds
gonna
like what
guess
Christine is saying, this
it's
is not
not
covered by our
included.
insurance.
This is not going to be covered.
This won't be covered by our insurance. And so, I mean, do you have insurance, Mr. Nickerson?
I have sorry, this is good for me to hear. I haven't had a sense of what the primary concern is here, but we there is an option. I've been trying to figure out what target is. So I have liability remaining through my old business, but there is an insurance policy that we as paramotor flyers can get. It's pretty affordable for what it is. I haven't bought into it because I'm covered by the blanket through my employer down in Florida. But it'd be pretty easy for me to implement a system working with Christine or anybody on the town side to make sure that anybody that would use the field would meet a certain standard of training and have, I don't know what, I think it's $1 million liability coverage. A friend of mine who flies out of New Jersey, I reached out to him, sort of getting a sense of what I might expect here. And that was one concern he got from the township he's in New Jersey, is they wanted to see that there was some sort of coverage. I thought there might be some sort of exemption for recreational use if if there's no money involved here. I don't remember. I know I'm at my vacation house in Maine where I know landowners are protected for recreational use. I don't know if they're similar. I saw mention of a statute like that in Massachusetts, but if it were something like requiring an insurance policy, I'd be thrilled to manage that. And the other basics that my buddy shared on what he had down there was just a basic set of standards for where's okay to fly, where is not okay to fly. And we have somewhat of a site briefing that we share with any new pilots that we bring in there. We're pretty specific.
All right, can I cut you off again here, and so we can
Sure,
get to some other questions about this? Pete, do you have particular questions?
I do. Thank you. Mr. Nickerson, thanks for coming. First of all, I guess it's not a question, but I would start with the fact that I think the cutting of the fields up there is timed around the nesting of the ground birds, so please don't cut any of our grass any more.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. I think I also noticed a windsock up there. Is that something that you put up in the field?
We carry it in when we fly. We take it out when we leave, but yes.
Okay. And are you charging for your services there?
Not for the tandem flights, I do charge, not locally. That's something I do when I'm, I'm saying I'm charging $100. I don't think I've charged anybody anything at Medfield. I've taken some people up for tandem flights out of Davis Field. It's generally a 20 to 30 minute flight out of Davis Field in Sudbury. There's $100 that's it's strictly as an instructional flight. That's the only way this tandem thing can happen. That's how we structure it. But for me, again, it's really this labor of love, really wanting to get people up and share the experience.
Thank you. And I guess I would it's not a question, but it's just a comment. I happen to live next to the hospital, and the consensus of the people that I've talked to is that it's basically lawnmowers in the sky. The neighbors that I've talked to find it an annoyance, just to share that with you. Thank you.
All right,
Mr.
Gus?
Marcucci, are you on the other side of the ball fields?
I'm on the other side of the softball fields, yes.
Gotcha. Yeah, we do make a point to not fly east from there. I've got sort of a site briefing map where we do try to steer clear of going, even to the ball fields. There was one day that I flew over the ball fields that was just after a storm had passed through. But, that's sort of off limits. We don't fly over congested areas.
We're good with there. All right, Gus, do you have questions?
I have some comments that maybe have questions embedded in them.
Sure.
There's a couple things that are jumping out at me in terms of trying to understand this. First, this is unique, so I don't think any of us have exactly a completely tight answer for what you're trying to find out right now, although certainly not cutting grass on the property is probably a pretty clear one. For what it's worth, while Pete lives closer to where you're flying, I live a little farther away to the east, and I don't hear the lawnmower noise so much. It's just kind of fun watching you guys up there in the setting sun. And I'm impressed to hear you up there at like 7 o'clock in the morning on some Saturday mornings. I assume it's the still air that makes that a good time to do it. But when you're far enough away, it's only the aesthetics that I think are pretty cool. There's a couple things that jump out at me, though. The first thing that I started thinking about, and this is for us, is I think generally in managing the state hospital property, our predisposition is to let people take advantage of the state hospital property for their own personal recreation purposes as much as possible. So, if I put this on a scale, it's probably a little riskier to be up with what you're flying up in the sky, but when it snows out, we let cross-country skiers go down the trails, and some of those trails are steep, and if they don't know what they're doing, they can hit a tree just as easily as you could hit a wire or something like that. So we allow that. I then started thinking, well, what if somebody wanted to put up a zip line at the top of the sledding hill and run it all the way down? So even if it was a temporary installation, are we okay with that? And it's like, well, I think we'd start anything that starts to become a modification of the property for a specific purpose is the place where I have a caution flag. And I'm not drawing a line yet. I'm just saying that's on my mind. The second thing that comes to mind for me is I gather you do charge some nominal amounts for when you're teaching people. That doesn't sound like this is a purely labor of love, personal hobby that you want to spread to anybody who would like to learn, and they can just come hunt you down, and maybe if they pay for the gas, you bring them up. There's a commercial aspect to this.
I've got a buddy that came out, my buddy Todd came out from Western Mass. Sorry, this is the sob story cancer thing, but Todd had cancer. He asked me if I could teach him to fly.
Yeah.
He lives just above Williamstown. I told him I can't, there's no way, but I'll get you a tandem flight. I went out to North Adams Airport, took him up behind Mount Greylock, and he insisted. He said, Dave, teach me to fly, teach me to fly. I brought him out, and he's working on kiting with me locally. We're running across the field. That's the extent of my local instruction. I mean, There's the idea of there being money in this. It's I've just left an industry where there was. I'm thrilled that COVID hit because I had a $500,000 a year live event production business, and I'm thrilled to be working for $1,500 every 2 weeks in Central Florida. I don't want to deal with the scale. I did put a logo on the side of my trailer. I think that's what a big flag raise was. I have a trailer that carries my trike. I think that and cutting the grass. Cutting the grass
Okay.
is,
Well, so where I'm coming from, in terms of what you're asking us for, are you asking for us to approve something that would enable you to have a commercial operation?
I'm not looking
And the
to
reason,
do
because the comparison for me would be the group VisWiz. It's a bunch of people who own Vizsla dogs who use the property, and they have organized events, but it's purely a group that shares an interest. I think they have a name. I don't know if they have logos or not, but so I'm trying to understand what you're hoping our actions would enable you to do.
to continue running into the sky, really just to keep using the field as we have for 3 years. I'd love to find a way to make sure we're steering clear of neighborhoods, or figuring out a way to make sure we're not annoying people. I mean, we generally fly out over the Oxbows, we fly out to the west, to the north, and that's for me. That's I like how we've existed for 3 years. Once I learned, Christine mentioned she wanted me to speak to you all. I'm wanting to be able to keep doing what we've been doing. The trike sort of treads the line because officially with the FAA, I can only take people up for tandem flights as instructional flights. There's no such thing as a joyride. There's no such thing. So I'm treading a line. I have to call it instructional. But I took Buzz's 88-year-old mother up for an instructional flight. For me, I'd be happy to stop cutting the grass.
I have a third issue. My third issue, and this may be for you, Mark, more than anyone else. So, even though the FAA doesn't want to be involved in regulation of your craft, the FAA has some limited degree of involvement with it. What I'm concerned about is if we formally approve something beyond just our general blanket, if you want to go use our property for recreation, you do it at your own risk. If there's something if this puts the town into a regime of liability by approving a usage which starts to encroach on FAA regulations and starts to create the top of the hill becoming an airfield or something like that, I don't know the answer to it, but that's a concern. If you can see where
I
I'm
understand.
from.
Yeah.
That question was addressed to Mark, wasn't it, or to Dave?
Well,
pardon me.
I'm not sure. I kind of said I think it might be Mark. If Dave has experience and can answer it, that's fine.
There's FAA regulation, as he indicated, it's not very detailed. It's more parameters, certain height restrictions, stay away from certain types of areas. They obviously depends on the power of the engine. At some point you go into a more restrictive and more regulated class, depends on the capabilities of the vehicle.
So, Mark,
Right.
if we were to approve this, and it was not at all commercial, it did not encroach on any FAA regulations, is there any increased exposure to the town by allowing this, and assuming that whatever residential issues like Pete's neighborhood might have, that's dealt with, is there any increased exposure of the town by allowing a private citizen to use our property for recreational purposes in a way that does not create problems with town residents? If it was something like this.
I would say there is potential increased liability. He's correct. We have a recreational use statute, but that would be a claim by the user, him or herself, being injured and trying to make a claim. That's where that protection lies. As far as third-party claims for property damage or personal injury, that's still there, and there may be The liability, as with any other event we allow up there, so my recommendation would be the usual license agreement with the conditions that contains, and that also would put an affirmative obligation upon him to obtain insurance coverage, however that's done. If there's no insurance coverage, then my assumption is he wouldn't be able to do it.
Again, the parallel that I have here, a couple of years ago, the Norfolk Hunt Club, the Norfolk Hunt Club grounds are open to anyone with a horse that wants to go riding, but horseback riding itself is a potentially hazardous, you can get hurt, you can get killed on a horse. The Hunt Club sent out a letter to people that had horses that said, you're more than welcome to use our property, but if you do use it, we would ask you to sign this indemnification that says you understand you're doing it at your own risk. And so I'm just kind of creating these scales that I'm trying to judge this thing. On the, for me, on the bottom line, if there's absolutely no objections to somebody wanting to do this, I think it's a really cool activity, and I can imagine why people would enjoy it. So my predisposition would be not to block someone from doing this just for bureaucratic reasons, but that's not to negate the potential exposures that I don't think the town wants to expose itself to.
Yeah,
So-
I mean, it's not a bad analogy. I was thinking along the lines of, somebody rides a dirt bike
Yeah.
on the Hospital Hill, right? They don't get a permit, they just ride their dirt bike on Hospital Hill, and I don't know, well, I think we would not have any liability to that person, right? I don't know that we'd have any liability to a person injured by that person, because I don't know that we have an obligation to prevent people from riding dirt bikes. So is this like riding a dirt bike? I think the problem is once it becomes a little more formal in the sense that you're taking other people up there and whether you're charging or not, you're sort of in the gray zone between, riding your dirt bike that happens to be a tricycle with a parachute in the back and teaching other people how to do it, taking other people up there, flying a hot air balloon. And so I guess before we can get into whether this is sufficiently annoying that we shouldn't allow it because it's annoying. And I will say that I've seen those things up there for a long time. I spent a lot of time on the baseball fields there. I never knew they took off from up there. I didn't know where they were coming in from, but you'd see them going around, and all the kids would like, oh, look at that. And you try to get them focused back on the game. And it really kind of made it very difficult with 10-year-olds to get them focused on what they're supposed to be doing. So thanks for that. But
I got to say, it makes me feel like a superhero.
Putting aside the frustrations of the coaches and the attention span of 9 and 10-year-olds, I think we got to answer the insurance question and liability question first, because once you're doing something formal with our permission up there, I think you're out of the realm even of just riding a horse along the path without permission, just on public space, which is probably why we have the recreation statute, to allow people to do that kind of thing, so you don't have to police who comes onto the property. So I think we need to sort all of that out first. I think from my perspective, before we can even consider granting some sort of a license, I think we've got to get comfortable that it sounds like our insurance is not going to cover it, and that whatever insurance you and your riders and guests, I don't know what you call riders, pilots, flyers, have, is sufficiently protective of the town, and not, again, less concerned about a claim from the people actually flying in the trikes, but if you crash into somebody on the ground, you crash into a car, you crash into a house, there could be potential liability if the town has granted you permission to take off from the property. So I'm going to suggest, subject to Pete and Gus's agreement, that we table this for now, and we sort out, if you want to do this, I think it's incumbent on you to show what the insurance coverage is, present to Christine and Mark what the insurance coverage is, and would we be comfortable, assuming that we would give a license similar to the license we've given to other events, where we also have to get comfortable with the insurance that the licensee has. Are we comfortable with that we're going to be sufficiently protective? Because for me, that's sort of the threshold question. And if we can't get over that hump, I'm not sure there's any need to get into kind of weighing the other merits or demerits of that. Peter Gus, do you have what do you think of that?
I think the insurance is essential. For me, I think the annoyance factor is not going to be overcome, so I'm going to just be against it based on that alone.
Yeah. Well, it may be the kind of thing, though, on the annoyance factor versus this is really cool factor, that the license is limited, right? You can do this in a particular window once a month, twice a month, right? I mean, I think I think we to that point. We certainly don't want to have this going on every night and potentially interfering with other activities that go on the Hill, and you know, there's got to be some rhyme or reason to it, but.
Yeah,
but-
most of the activity that we've encouraged up there has been people walking trails,
Yeah.
viewing sunsets, and I mean, there is a ton of dog walking going on up there, which at times, according to John Thompson, is problematic. So, and there have been.
Well,
dog
let's,
fights.
Just one question to your, first up, I'm on board with what you want to do, so I'll be happy to be the cool factor to offset Pete's annoyance factor, and then we can still figure things out. But the only question I had is, were your comments specifically directed toward the use of the tandem trikes, or are we basically talking about all of this kind of activity?
I think
being held
all
until
of this
the-
activity, if we're looking for permission to do this, yeah.
Okay.
Mr. Marcucci, let me just, if I may, throw in one more consideration. If you get over the insurance obstacle, and that is you've got one individual here tonight proposing to do this for himself and perhaps some friends, but the issue would be parameters. I assume there are others out there that would be looking to do it as well. So I think you need to look at the big picture if you're inclined to go in that direction.
It's like the Vizslas, it'll grow.
Right. Well, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it, Mark,
Yep.
and see if we sort something out. Because the point is well taken. I think, to Pete's point, from my perspective, however cool it is, it's certainly not something we want going on every night. And so if it's going to go on at all, it's got to be with some limited amount. And the same way we wouldn't want a concert going on at 11 o'clock there at night or otherwise in the way. But let's deal with the liability first, because we can't get over that. We don't even need to weigh coolness versus annoyance, and we can just move on. So I'm going to call an end to this particular agenda item. Mr. Dickerson, thank you for your time. And ask
Mike,
you
I'm
to-
sorry. I'm sorry. Before you do, I just want to make sure with Pete. I want to make sure. I want to see what we can do to address his annoyance concerns, because it's not. I don't think it's insurmountable. I mean, we're on motors that my big motor is 185 cc's, and I'd like to find a way. We fly often from Millis, which is nowhere near great a field as this, but sometimes we'll come over near the fields. I'd love to be able to speak offline with Pete. I'm a reasonable person. I'd like to be able to speak with you at some point just to help address and see if we can get around.
I'm happy to talk to you. I think you should resolve the insurance issue first, and if you can get by that, then sure, get in touch with me.
Great. Thank you for coming in, Mr.
Okay.
Nickerson. All right. Given the
Excellent.
time,
Thank
I'm
you.
going to move this around a little bit and go to the two agenda items for which there are people here. We'll go first to what should be the shorter one, which is number 5. Building Commissioner Gary Pelletier requests that the Board of Selectmen vote to appoint Bill Cook and William Mancini as Inspector of Wires. So Christine, can we promote, I see,
He should be coming over right now.
here is Gary. So.
You know, Chris, when we put in these big TVs here, I had a different thought as to how they were going to be used. I thought of
Gary?
Power
There you
plants.
are. Hi, Gary.
Hi, gents.
How
Hi,
are
Chris.
you?
I'm good. How's everybody there?
We're fine. So we
Good.
have a request from you to appoint William Cook to the position of Inspector of Wires and Mr. Michael Mancini to the position of Assistant Wiring Inspector. Want to give us the 2-sentence background on each of these gentlemen?
Bill Cook has been our assistant since 2013. He's also Inspector of Wires in Rentham. Extremely experienced, very good inspector. He's picked up and hit the ground running since May. He's handled the vast majority of inspections and permitting, electrical permitting for the town of Medfield since May. So it's my recommendation that we formally appoint him as the head inspector of wires from his assistant position, and also appoint Mr. Mike Mancini An assistant wire inspector, Mike, is also very, very experienced. He's been in the trades for almost 30 years. He's been an inspector of wires in Milford since 2002. So the addition, the promotion of Bill and the addition of Mike Mancini will provide us with adequate staffing for the building department with regards to electrical inspections and coverage, both in the normal realm as well as for emergencies. So, we'll have a great staff and a great team, and these are two very, very great additions to our department.
Great. Pete, any questions?
No.
Gus?
Just one clarification. Is this are we appointing them as inspector of wires or assistant inspector of wires?
Bill Cook would be the inspector of wires.
Okay.
He's currently an assistant on our staff.
Mm-hmm.
And Mike Mancini would be joining our staff as an assistant.
Yeah, assistant, I'm just trying to get the titles right for the motion.
Yeah.
Assistant inspector of wires?
Yep.
Yeah.
I would do two motions.
Assistant
Okay.
wiring inspector is what the letter says, Gus.
What is it?
Assistant,
Wiring inspector.
Assistant wiring inspector. Okay. We'll do it as two motions.
yep, unless you have any comments or questions.
I do
don't
not.
have any. All right,
Okay. I move that we vote to appoint Bill Cook as inspector of wires.
Second?
all in favor?
Yes.
Aye.
Opposed? All right,
I move that we appoint William Mancini as assistant wiring inspector.
Second?
Mike
All in favor?
Mancini.
Michael Mancini.
Second?
I was about to say Michael, and it's printed as William. I correct the motion. I move that we appoint Michael Mancini as the assistant wiring inspector.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, congratulations to Mr. Cook and Mr. Mancini. Gary, thank you very much.
Thank you, gentlemen.
All right, we'll now shift to our meeting with the Warrant Committee Elementary School Project Subcommittee, which was scheduled with wild optimism for 7 o'clock. It's now 7:45, and so rather than have all of you stay through the rest of our meeting, we're obviously more than welcome to do so, but we might as well move on to this part of our agenda. So, Not you, Bob. Anyone else can sit up. You can,
your iPad,
you can-
that's not coming to the front row.
you can stay right where you are. No.
I just moved the first time, so it didn't look like we were doing boy-girl thing.
Welcome to Warrant Committee Chair Sharon Tatro and Warrant Committee members. If you could just all introduce yourselves for the record and for people watching at home, and then we can, you do need a mic, yes, if you'd like to be heard.
Not that one. There we go.
Steve Callahan.
Welcome,
Jillian Rafter,
welcome.
Sharon Tatro.
Hello.
You already acknowledged. Bob Sliney.
Welcome, Mr. Sliney. All right, welcome. So I think this meeting is being held at your request. Talk
It
about
is,
the school
and
project.
so I guess just to kick that off, we as a warrant committee and then us as a subcommittee have decided that the best way to try to tackle the future upcoming article for the special town meeting was to have some just conversations with who we have kind of listed as the stakeholders in this. And so you, of course, are on this list. The SBC, the school committee, and Dale at Dale, and the other elementary school PAC are also on our list. So you get the pleasure of being the first one, so we can have the dry run together. We wanted this to be pretty casual from the standpoint of we just wanted to maybe ask some questions that we all have, and we also wanted to find out from you what are the questions that you are getting from townspeople that you think that we should be looking at most while we're kind of going through this process. Because our intention is to make sure as much as possible all the questions that are out there in the town have factual based answers for them to be able to make their own decision. So that's kind of our goal. So I don't know if any of you want to start or if we want to just hear from you guys as to what you're hearing. Does anyone have an opinion? It's our first one.
I think just getting your insight to start would be beneficial, just to
see what we should focus on as we embark on this endeavor.
That's setting a high bar, expecting us to have insight on this. You're obviously new to this.
I am, yes.
We'll be happy to say some words at you, and you can decide whether we're.
If they're insightful.
offering any
Okay,
insight.
fair enough.
So, all right, if you want us to start, Pete?
So there was a huge flurry of input about this issue back when the issue was up for a vote before the select board and the school building committee. It has tapered off dramatically, at least to me. I don't get the volume of questions about it since then. The questions then were mainly around the finances, I think, and there were a lot of people that lived in the neighborhood of Wheelock that were concerned about traffic issues. I haven't heard anybody address the thing that was really important to me as I listened to the school building committee, which was that most of the members said that if we built this new school at the Dale Street site, that the site is too small and we would get a compromised building. That, for me, has remained the main concern for me. I don't want to spend tens of millions of dollars and end up with a school that is compromised. I think that the other things that have been, the other positives of the Wheelock site, the educational synergies, there's been some debate about that, certainly. I don't know enough.
Can I back you up 1 second and just ask a follow-up question? When you mentioned that the Dale site is compromised inside, is your question as to whether or not you think that's true, or is your question as in you would like more information to know if that's true?
So here are my notes from the September 16, 2020 meeting. Mike Quinlan, Dale congested. Tim Bonfatti, Dale site too tight. A new school does not fit. Runs into uncertainties. Dale site too small to do it right. Mike Weber said Dale ad reno could be great, but as someone in construction, it is not practical, site too tight. So that the people on the school building committee who seem to have experience in building schools thought that the Dale Street site was too small. And that, I don't know how you get around that sort of expertise giving you opinions. I always tell my clients that the best thing that they can hire me for is my gut reaction as an attorney who's practiced law for decades. And that's what I'm hearing from these people that are very experienced in this field. So for me, that was the decision point.
Gotcha. Next.
He's on the committee, so you're going to get more insight from him than either Pete and me combined. I do track a lot of the posts and the debates that have gone on, and for the most part, like 99.9% have stayed out of it. Mainly because I don't think I have superior knowledge to add. I have opinions, but I don't have superior knowledge. And if there is anyone on the committee that has superior knowledge on this specific issue, it will be him you'll hear from third. There's a couple of things that are driving my thinking about this. The first point about the debate between the two locations, I have heard from people on both sides of the issue who I have very high respect for. And so what happens is there's people here saying one thing, there's people here saying another thing. I think an awful lot of them all. And it's like there are strong arguments relative to what people value. So that's the first point is I don't think there's any clear wind blowing in one direction or the other here. And that's a worry for me come fall, because what I don't know for sure is even though people have different opinions, how many of those people will literally fall on their sword over a decision that doesn't, if it comes down to the decision they didn't want, do they not want it so much that they'll fall on their sword? Many people say they'll do that. particularly, I think, on the Dale side. I'm not sure how true that gets to be when push comes to shove. So that's first point. I know what I've got. It's both sides of the seesaw. I can't discern truth there. Second point, from my perspective in this debate, probably since at least the beginning of the year, there has been confusion on the part of people who make these clear statements that one option is a whole lot cheaper than the other option. I kind of locked in when the building committee first laid out those options, and what I came away with was, for all intents and purposes, when you're at a $75 or $80 million project, plus or minus $1 or $2 million, those options are equivalent. Now, those are direct costs. There's then been the secondary discussion around the secondary costs, around either, the infrastructure that we have to put in here, or what are we going to do with the Old Dale School if we don't get there. I think there's some validity to raising those issues, but I don't think it's valid to simply start piling on those second-tier costs to one option that you don't like. And so there's, like in the case of the Dale Street School, it may cost us money in town, but I don't have any doubt that the town will very quickly come up with some good ideas for how to reuse that school if we don't use it for a school. So I do think, especially if I were on the warrant committee, I would be concerned with tracking what I think of as second-order costs, because they kind of are a big deal, but they aren't necessarily, in my mind at least, a strict driver in terms of the direct decision. They're the implications. The last piece of this for me is that, and this is a broader lesson I think I've learned as a selectman, if you appoint a committee to do a job, if you think the committee is following an improper process in doing that job, then I think it's appropriate for you as a selectman to second guess the actions of that committee and do what you think is necessary to get the committee on the right track. So about a year ago, when we delayed approving the submission at that time so that there were time for more public meetings, from my standpoint, that was a process issue that wasn't being carried out right. On the other hand, when a committee has been appointed to do a job, even if I had an opinion that was different than what the committee recommended, and I'm not saying that that's the case here, I would be very reluctant to simply say, oh, I appointed a committee, but I had a hip pocket answer, and I was hoping the committee would get to my hip pocket answer, but seeing as they didn't, I'm going to step in and override it. So my specific position around where we are right now in this process is that I am supportive of what the committee elects to come to the Board of Selectmen for approval with, because I have confidence that we put in competent people and that they've gone through a process. And I recognize the critiques of what hasn't happened, especially around education. I think there's a whole lot more could have been done there. Last point, this is my point. A year and a half ago, in a joint school committee, Board of Selectmen meeting, and I think the warrant committee was there too, I basically arbitrarily stuck a stake in the ground around affordability. That stake said whatever financing this town has to take out to support this town should not result in total debt of the town that exceeds the value of the town budget. In really round numbers, our town budget's around $70 million. By the time we're planning to float this debt, we'll have about $20 million in remaining principal on existing debt. Do the math, we have $50 million. If the MSBA reimburses 23% of that, we have about $60 to $62 million is where the price of this school needs to be. That's my position. I understand that there may be pushback, and some of that pushback may be legitimate, but if there's not a voice for affordability on behalf of the taxpayers of the town, it's probably more you guys than me, in fairness, but that's where my stake is, and I, at this point, have not moved it.
Okay, so on the first question you asked about sort of what questions we get asked and the concern, I mean, I think my experience is similar to Pete. There was a lot of communications, around the time when the school building committee, and we were making a judgment about site selection. And I think they fell kind of into two major buckets, other than questions like, how could you be so stupid to even consider putting something in Elm Street, which was a substantial percentage of the communications that I got. Putting aside those kind of questions, I think probably the majority were people who lived in the general area who were concerned about traffic and impact in the neighborhood and loss of some of the open space over there. I would say if I looked at the addresses of the people I got emails from, that would probably be the plurality of those. And I would say the next group are people who largely had kids go through the schools, who liked the location somewhat closer to downtown, kind of liked Dale Street, didn't think there's anything wrong with what we were doing now, why change it? There's definitely a divide in correspondence. I think that most of the people who have younger kids yet to go through the school, who I hear from, favor the Elm Street location. I think a lot of the people who favor the Dale Street location don't have more kids to go through the school. It's not uniformly true. There's variation. But I would say, at least anecdotally, since you asked about the kind of communications I would get, I would say there's a clear divide there. And on that front, and again, that's no more scientific than anything else, but I would say that's definitely noticeable that a lot of the pro Elm Street folks I hear from say, I've got kids who are 1, 3, and 5, and see the benefits of looking ahead and having one drop off for kids who are in 2nd grade and 4th grade and all of that. So, and then the third one is cost. I think similar to Gus, I think there's been some misconceptions about cost in the process and the variability between them. I think the more time I spend in the school building committee going through this, so many of the costs are fixed in the sense that if you want to build a school that meets the MSBA requirements and meets the academic program and meets the enrollment that's agreed, there's sort of, you can't get below a certain amount, right? Because the MSBA has requirements for how big the classrooms has to be. They've got requirements for how big the cafeteria has to be, how big you have to have certain things. You can't decide, we're not going to have a cafeteria and the kids will just eat in the room. So there are minimums that the MSBA sets for schools that if you meet them, it's hard to get below it, right? Hard to get it much lower. I think the question I asked in a budget discussion the other night is sort of as you range the building between a tent and the Taj Mahal, where is this? And it's not quite a tent, but it's pretty far away from a Taj Mahal. In a lot of cases, with maybe about I think we're about 3,000 square feet of the building is not required by the MSBA standards. So wherever you build it, that's kind of, our gym's a little bigger, our stage is a little bigger. There's a couple of other pieces of the building. Otherwise,
Am I right that the daycare's been taken out of it?
Daycare's been taken out.
Yeah, good.
Daycare's been taken out. So that was the discussion we had the other night. So that's kind of what I've been hearing. From my own perspective on it, I think in keeping with something that I talk about a fair amount is trying to think about this kind of in the long-term context of the town and what this means for the next thing and the next thing after that, because when you build a building, it lasts 75 years or 80 years or longer, and each decision we make has ramifications for the next one. And one of the things that's been important to me in thinking about the location issue and the school issue is if you build the school, if you were to stay where we are, it seems to me we are committing ourselves to having 3 elementary schools, because we have about, even at our low enrollment right now, we have about 1,200 kids in the elementary schools. I do not believe, even if, to Pete's point about the tightness of the site, which I think is true, even if you were to say it's worth sacrificing that extra space and that extra room to move and sacrificing the other things you'd be sacrificing, I don't think you're going to get all the elementary school kids in town on that one campus. So I think, maybe you get 2/3 of them as what you have now, but getting all of them on that one campus seems to me to be a stretch. So you're basically, I think, committing to keeping 3 elementary schools if you were to stay at Dale Street. This was important to me in kind of deciding this, that we would be committing the town when it came time for Wheelock to be replaced, that we'd have to replace it, and probably replace it in the same location. I think Wheelock is the same age as all of our other school buildings, essentially. I mean, part of Dale Street is older, but I think if you look at the building dates, they're all pretty much built in the 60s, and then the 3 schools were rehabbed in the in 2000. So Wheelock was built, I think, in 1969, but it's the same vintage. I mean, it's the same kind of construction, and it's had its own issues. But I think it's unquestionable that during the term of this bond, we're going to have to deal with Wheelock one way or the other. And so a big factor for me on the location was the idea that I don't think it necessarily makes sense to have 3 elementary schools. I think as the cost to build schools and build buildings and gets higher, both because of inflation and frankly because we're required by building codes to build much better buildings now than we did in the 1960s. I think we could replicate what Wheelock is today. It would be illegal, but we could replicate it for a lot less money. But so we're looking at kind of the same kind of decision, 10, 15, 20 years from now on that building, at which point, of course, we'll be 40 years out of the renovation of the high school, the middle school, and Memorial. And so I think one of the factors on the site selection anyway for me was that if you built this building at Wheelock, particularly given the size it's going to have to be in light of the MSBA's enrollment requirements, that obviously if the enrollment met what the MSBA projects, which for those who have listened to me on this topic for a while, I don't think it will, but I could be wrong. If it doesn't, then that can be a 3-grade school. And when it comes time to replace Wheelock, instead of replacing Wheelock, you could simply put an addition onto Memorial. You'd have K-2 on one campus, 3 to 5 on the other. And I think overall it's a much cheaper long-term plan for the town. Now again, is that 10 years from now, 15 years from now, 20 years from now? Hopefully I'm still here, not here, but hopefully still here on this earth in the town of Medfield. So, I mean, that was a big factor for me, as well as the educational aspect of it. I think I was persuaded by the views of the education folks about the continuity between 2nd to 5th grade, that there's a lot more in the curriculum and a lot more in what actually happens in the schools that makes more sense from an educational standpoint for 2 to 5 to be together and kind of separate K-1. It's sort of a developmental marker there between 1st and 2nd grade, that there's a little bit of a bigger gulf that kind of makes sense for those grades to go together. Some towns are building 2 to 5. 2 to 5 schools, and I know it was the preference of the school committee to have this be a 3 to 5 school anyway, but they deferred on the cost issue just because of how expensive that would be in light of the enrollment numbers. So those are some, I've spoken on other aspects of this as well, but I think for me those are bigger issues that I don't want to say they're unique to me, but they're it was a big motivating factor for me in thinking about where we go long term and why one site was preferable to the other. And I think the other factor too is that as we went through this process, I think to Pete's point, I don't know that the alternative, if the town were to decide one way or the other they prefer the Dale Street location, I don't think the automatic alternative is a brand new school there. I think I don't think that it's the same calculus at all to say we're going to build a brand new school there. If we decide not to build the one on Elm Street, I think it might be something else. So I'll stop talking now, but that's my spiel.
Does anybody have questions? So I guess, and forgive me, I am new, so maybe this isn't the right place to ask, but should this move forward in the fall, do you have an idea of other capital improvement projects that maybe get deferred or impacted by the majority of funds and tax impact on just the one school?
I don't think it should. I mean, we have, we established in 2018 a dedicated stabilization fund for building maintenance. The only other building that's sort of an imminent need of resolution is Parks and Recreation and the FAF Center. I think when the town did its, Pete, when was the original 4-building capital? 2008 or so, kind of laid out the 4 buildings that needed to be done: public safety, DPW, Dale Street, and the FAF Center. And so that's kind of the only other one that would be impacted, which I think one way or the other, it's not a maintenance issue, it's a new building issue or a no building issue or a repurposing issue. So I don't think this would result in any deferral of maintenance. It would remove from our existing, would free up money on our regular capital plan, because in our regular capital plan, there's $11 million, I believe, that's focused on the existing Dale Street building. So if we didn't replace it, we'd have the work we'd have to do on the Dale Street building, and so that could be, reordered towards some of the other stuff on there.
So I think I have a different view, not on maintenance, so that to the extent that we have the the fund that's been established for the maintenance of buildings. I would agree. And if any, and Mike's right, if the Dale Street School goes away and a new school replaces it, then the things that are in that plan, on the assumption that the Dale Street School would be maintained, there is a paper windfall that would come there. My issue about affordability is directly tied to the issue of a Parks and Rec building. If we have, and you saw the earlier tax impact of $800 to $950, if we have that kind of a tax impact for the school, in my view, Parks and Rec, the facility for the Parks and Rec department just went out 10 years. So part of why I've got that stake where I have it isn't because we're just going to hold everything down. It's that there is this other debate that's going on. And I can tell you that debate has been going on since I moved to this town 25 years ago when my youngest son wasn't even born. And when I moved here, the Parks and Rec facility was number 5 on the list of priorities in 1995. My son graduated from college, my youngest son graduated from college 2 years ago. There was never any Parks and Rec facility, so that I have no skin in the game around that. But I've had 25 plus years now of having seen that not happen. So if we're serious about wanting to make it happen, we need to have the funds to be able to pay for it to happen. And what I'm basically saying is an $80 million school with what it appears would be the tax impact of that kind of a school on the taxpayers, from my standpoint, has just pushed the Parks and Rec building out another 10 years. Because we can't just say, but we have another thing on the list, so we just have to buy it. I think we have to stop that kind of an attitude if we want to keep the town close to what it was or is.
So one of my questions that I've sort of focused on is the cost side of this whole thing, and I've tried to study as much as I can about site location. I think I understand that pretty well. But on the cost side, I think you referred to it as the tent in the Taj Mahal, right? I'm more interested in trying to find out what the MSBA process has a bunch of parameters around. There's sort of two factors. There's the rate they reimburse, which I think is around 43%, and then there's the eligible cost pool, the bucket of costs that are subject to that reimbursement. And so my question is, how comfortable, you're the closest to this, I think, in this room, I guess. So when you look at it, how comfortable are you how far out away from that, I guess I'll put it this way, if that cost pool, if say the total pool's, I'm going to use round numbers, 100 million, and the eligible cost is 70. So there's $30 million of decisions that this group has made, and there's probably good reasons for them. So in other words, that 43% is going to be applied to the 70 million, and we're all in 100% on the 30 million, and that's based on decisions around whatever they are. They're probably, some of them are very valid reasons, like we're going to take care of the Wheelock parking lot, things like that. But have they done that kind of analysis to show you to be comfortable with that?
So they've done it throughout, sort of trying to estimate. I mean, some of it is, I think, and the question is probably better put to one of the people who do at the MSBA all the time. And I think that, our number, I think, is 39%. So for, given where Medfield is economically, and as I understand it, that you very rarely hit that number because there are caps and there's complicated sub-factors, and we get an additional percentage for doing net zero, and there's kind of a variety of different caps and percentages that are applied. And so I think the working assumption is that the MSBA will cover about, on the current budget, 18 to 19 million, about 20% or 20 to 25%. It's still applying the 39. And I can't quote you chapter and verse as to exactly where you would go. I think it is true that generally speaking, you don't get the full amount because of the caps in the different areas. And so, I'm comfortable that we're trying to do the best we can to maximize the amount of reimbursement that we get. Okay. The MSBA process is set up to solve the problem that the Commonwealth had created for itself under the old system. And so it's designed to push costs to the towns and designed to incentivize the towns to spend more. You know, when we did the 3-school project, and Bob would know better than I would, I think the state paid 60% of that cost?
63%.
63%, right.
I
And
think
they
it
got,
only costs $200 or $300 a square foot versus the $600 plus
Yeah.
per square foot now.
and so they paid a lot of 63% over periods of time and got themselves in trouble. And so they changed the way they did it, and they came up with this process, which, as far as I can tell, is designed to provide enough assistance to the towns to incentivize them to do it, but also it sets the caps in places where they know the towns aren't gonna cut back on what they're gonna do. In other words, you're not gonna drive your class size to 35 to save more money on it. And,
Yeah.
you know, you could do that, right? I mean, you could say, all right, we're gonna put 40 kids in a classroom, that'd be a cheaper building. Right, I mean, you could certainly do those kinds of things. I don't think the MSBA sets you have to have at least a certain square footage for a classroom.
For a
I don't think they
classroom,
set a
right.
class size.
Yeah.
And the school committee has a class size requirement, but I mean, when I think that a couple of years ago, we had this blip in enrollment that I think there were 25 kids in the 3rd grade, and that was bad. So, which was ironically right around the time, you know, we agreed to the enrollment amount.
Yeah.
You know, no one was saying that enrollment's not gonna go up, because everyone was horrified that we had 25 kids in a 3rd grade classroom. And so, you know, I had a lot of debates about enrollment projections then on, my position's been consistent throughout. But, you know, it's, so there's things you can do to kind of make it lower, but I think they're not things that we would do. I think it's probably, you know, I think when we were having the discussion the other night, that you'd get into programming, you'd get into stuff that we want to do. And so you might be able to build a building that was a lot cheaper, but I don't know that it's a building that anybody here would have moved to Medfield to send their kids to go to school in, I guess.
Right, okay.
So that's a long way of saying you should ask somebody else in the details of the reimbursement, but I don't think there's any effort not to,
We will.
not to
We'll look at it.
maximize.
I just want to get your view on what that,
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, it seems to line up with what happens to other towns and other buildings, and looking at other similar towns and other similar buildings. We seem to be in the, you know, which isn't always the, you know, it isn't always the standard, but it's part of the standard, obviously, because it's what people are gonna look at as far as what they're getting.
Mike, can I share a perspective? And you're closer to this, so you can tell me whether it's right or wrong, but when we talk about the MSBA and we talk about the state and we talk about how the state wants to save money, I look at the pieces of the process I've gotten a glimpse of. So I was asked to be on the visioning committee at the very start. Now, if anyone's familiar with visioning, what you do is that's unconstrained thinking. So, and even coming into it with the fiscal, you know, hard line, I understood at that stage and that discussion for that purpose, it's not constructive to talk about all the constraints that we should be worried about. So you have that, and then you have the MSBA. I think I was the chair of the committee when suddenly you get this letter that says, okay, MSBA, here's the contract you need to sign for the architect, you know, for the architect. And it's like, wait a minute, what do you mean I have to sign it? Well, if you need my signature, shouldn't I get to make a decision? And then I looked at it, and it was like, well, I don't know them from anyone else, and I don't know why it's this one, but do I want to fall on my sword over this and stop this process before it ever leaves the gate? It's like, no. So you sign it. Well, you get an architect who wants to design a effective and stunning building. They're not coming in with standard designs. They're coming in with what you need against your visioned requirements, and you go through this process. So what I've been looking for in this whole process is a sincere, hard-nosed discussion about what can be afforded. And if it's taken place, I mean, I understand, because I've been as openly obnoxious as probably anyone about the issue of price, and I've done it deliberately, starting a year and a half ago, because I've learned in the past that starting 2 months before the town meeting, it's all about the children. So you're not going to have that conversation 2 months before the town meeting. It's either throughout the process or it's too late. But I look at that whole process, and it's a process that starts from what would you like, you know, what would we need, and then we can create that, and here's the concept on the ground, and here's what it costs. And there's never, as far as I can tell, that, like you just said, well, I don't know that there's anything we cut out. Well, I refer to that as like if you went to go buy a car and you go into the car dealer, if you use this process, you thought you wanted a Ford Explorer SUV, every one of us is going to drive off with a Cadillac Escalade because of our visioning process and all the things we want. And that's what they cost. And so the piece that I've been looking for greater comfort on is this thing that says, but did we ever actually look at what taxpayers can afford? And did we ever set a design to cost target, regardless of, all this other stuff? Did we set something that's reasonable? Maybe my number's too low, because my design, I'm harder nosed. But did we ever actually ask that question?
Well, I think we did, Gus, but I think the problem is it's not as simple an answer as you want to get. Because the question is, you have to look at what is the educational program that people want to have, right? Because that's part of the question. Because if the idea is if you're buying a car because you're driving 10 people someplace, right? And you can say, well, I can only spend $10,000. I guess that means I only can drive 4 people, right? What's the point of that particular analysis?
Or buy a used car that has 10 people. I mean, and I'll hate that I have to do it.
And maybe that's the answer. Maybe the answer is just gonna be that we don't need to get a new school. That's a perfectly fine, it's a perfectly fine answer, that we're gonna stick with what we have, right? That if people decide that's what we're going to do,
My
that's
used
fine.
car didn't say don't get a car. I said, get not the car you want.
Right,
get the car
but
that-
I think, Gus, I think the idea, from everything I've seen, we cannot build a school that will satisfy the educational program and satisfy the minimum requirements for a $50 million town contribution with the MSBA. Like, I just think that would be a $65 million budget, $67 million. I just don't think it's possible.
So if you think
Now-
about the implication of that, if it costs $80 million for 2 grades in a town that has K through 12, and if you just do a straight extrapolation, what that says is that over time, we will need $500 million in capital assets just for education. If 2 grades is no way we could do it for under $80 million. I don't accept that.
Well, I mean, first, you're assuming that it's the same cost for every grade, right? And this is part of my
I think
point.
the high school's more expensive. I didn't count that.
This is part of my point about trying to reduce the number of buildings we have, right? Because if you buy 2 $70 million buildings, is more expensive than one $80 million building. And so if you think you're saving money by saying, aha, we drove it down to 70, we've got to pay now another 70 in 10 years. And look how smart we were 10 years ago to drive that down to 70. Maybe we can drive it down to 70 again. And now we paid 140 instead of 80.
But with that philosophy, then you should have been advocating for an addition to be put onto the Wheelock School to get down to 1 building.
Gus, one of the,
Maybe I should have been, but what I'm saying is that also was not on the table, right? I mean, what was on the table was a replacement for Dale Street. And if that was one of the options to put an addition, I mean, this is effectively an additional Wheelock, it's an additional building that's nicer than the one that is there. And so, again, my kids are almost certainly not going to go through this building whatsoever. I've got no personal stake in this, other than I will be a taxpayer to help pay for it. But I think focusing solely on, as you acknowledge, an arbitrary cost figure.
Doesn't mean it's wrong.
I don't think it gets in it, no, but it's also arbitrary, right? And so, but it's perfectly legitimate to say that we can't afford this, is too expensive, and we're better off just with a Band-Aid on what we have. If people want to take that position, that's fine. I think it's wrong to say that conceivably we could have gotten something 40% cheaper that's also a brand-new school that also does all of the things the building does. And so.
They don't sell Cadillac Escalades at those discounted prices.
Yeah, well, I mean, as long as we have, and so there's just trade-offs, right? There's a trade-off between the educational benefits you get from what's being proposed, right? And there's a trade-off you get on a variety of levels against what's the alternatives are, right? And if it's fine to say, I think that's not a good deal, right? It's fine to say, and again, it's fine to say, I don't think we should spend that amount of money, period, on a school, which is what you're saying, right? There's a maximum amount you should spend on a school, and I think the reality is that you're sort of caught in between, right? To do what you want to do, we'd have to get out of the MSBA program, and then we could build the school to whatever specs we wanted to, and then lose their reimbursement, right? So,
No, I don't agree that that's true. because
Well, I mean, they have,
we
they
had a-
have
we
certain
had a
requirements,
price
they
that
have
was-
certain requirements.
but there are
that you have
additional
to meet.
features that are here. I mean, I'm
What
not
are
in the
those
de-
additional features you see?
Well, certainly the extra size gymnasium is one that immediately jumps out. I mean, there's
It's like an extra three, but what I'm saying, Gus, is that you can get a couple of $1 million that way.
Mhm.
Right, you can't get $15 million that way. Or $18 million.
if you look, well, my point.
And again, I'm
my
not saying
point-
your position is wrong.
My
I'm
point,
just saying,
my
trying
real
to say that
point
this, they were
here,
buying a Cadillac Escalade here is not true.
it actually is. I spent years working in aerospace defense as a consultant. And the attitude, and this goes back, it's still there, but back then, it was, the mission is the mission, because that's where the military, we have to do this. And what happens is, well, this is what has to be accomplished, we'll tell you what the price is, because the mission is the mission. What you just said there, when you said, well, I arbitrarily picked a price of affordability, that's correct, I did. What I have not heard is a counter-argument that says, no, we actually think the taxpayers can afford more than what you think, Gus. I have not heard that in any conversations. I didn't hear it with you, and I haven't heard it in anybody pushing
But again,
back.
you're not talking about anything but taxpayer affordability. The taxpayer amount is $850 to $900. What percentage of Medfield taxpayers do I think can afford $850 to $900 more? I think it's pretty high.
Well,
I think
that's
it's a
where
pretty
we're
high
different.
percentage. I
That's
think
where
if
we
you have an
differ. And
average.
that gets at the root of the issue. Because the people you're thinking of, if that's the town you want, you won't like the town, well, maybe you will like the town you wind up with. It's not a town I would have moved to. The
So
people
good.
I'm thinking of are the ones who can't afford that.
Right, and I look, Gus, and that's fine, and I think about them too, right? And there's plenty of people in that circumstance though who also will benefit from the school, right? And so, I mean, you're talking about somebody who can't afford to live here at $900, but can at $650.
I thought I was gonna get slammed for profligate spending when I put the stake there to start with.
No, I
thought
mean, that's what
people
you're
were gonna-
talking about. And maybe that's and maybe you're right. Maybe that's the people we should think about, and then just not think about the school and the education and the rest of it, and do something different. And it's
No,
fine
it's
to,
not an absolute, let's not think
I'm
about
not.
it.
No,
It's-
here's what I'm saying. And I'm saying that if it's just a cost issue, fine. It's just a cost issue.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to spend that much. You think it's too much, that's fine. I mean, then we're just not getting a new school now.
It's not that either. You're saying if we don't spend 80 million, if we spend 60 million, we can't get a new school.
No, what I'm saying is that we'd have to be, I don't think we, I don't think we can do it through the MSBA program. We can get out of the MSBA program, we can come up with a different set of standards and just pay for it ourselves. And come up with whatever we can get for under $50 million.
Well,
Gus,
Right,
I'd like
that's
to-
what you're saying.
when you say we can't comply with the MSBA standards, but there's also things that are built into the school that exceed what the limits are of the
Right,
MSBA
and
that
again,
doesn't compute.
And I could be
for it.
wrong, but I asked this exact question. And the answer I got was you could probably squeeze another $2 or $3 million off the design if you went to the bare minimum.
I think you've been given a very low number for what that is.
I mean, then I think you should sit down with the design and redesign the building. Or just say you're against it, which is perfectly fine,
So,
to just be against it.
so the stake in the ground is clear on where I am, and depending on where we come out.
Right, well, I think it's unlikely.
And I've
it's
tried to
unlikely
signal
at-
this
it's unlikely,
early.
No, I know. And I respect your opinion, and I think your opinion is worthy of respect. And I don't think it's correct, because, again, it is arbitrary. And
So-
it leaves us, and if we do go to the point where, let's say I'm right, or let's say that the people who are looking at this are right, that you can't get within the MSBA requirements and get a building that has a town contribution under $50 million, right? You can then, let's say that's correct. Then the alternative is to decide we're not gonna be in the MSBA process, and we're gonna build a much smaller school that doesn't have to meet it, and that will get whatever school we can get for $50 million. And that's fine. I mean, it's
Well,
perfectly fine.
your argument is assuming it can't be done. That's the only thing I'll point out.
No, I'm not assuming it can't be done.
You're comfortable that by staying in the MSBA program, building that bigger school, it allows for more flexibility in the event that we either get more students or we're able to reconfigure the schools later on down the road. So that kind of what you're saying?
My view of it is this, that if you look at the numbers, right, if you rejected the MSBA on enrollment
Yeah.
and said you went our own way, what you lost in reimbursement, you'd be back to, you'd be paying the same amount for a smaller building.
Right.
Right, so essentially what we're getting by being in the MSBA process is we're getting a 575 student school for a town contribution of 450, right? And, you know, again, I think to Gus's point, I think there's certainly ways to get there. Again, one of the things required would be increasing the class size, right? That you could have fewer classrooms and you could educate more kids if you increase the class size guidance from, but I think it's 21 or 22, is that the school committee target? Yeah, if you increase that to 27, 28, or 30, you could.
Well,
make the
that's
building cheaper.
using the design, when you say increase the class size, that would be against a fully enrolled, if you hit the target enrollment.
No, I'm just
This
thinking-
issue is not an issue that would become an issue for a long time.
No, I'm
Depending on growth.
saying is that if you increase the class size target, right? And the building is designed with the school committee's class size target in mind. So I don't think the MSBA tells us what the class size has to be. They say you have to have a school for 575 kids. If you have a town that has a class size in elementary school of 40, well, you need fewer classrooms to get 575 kids than you do in a town with a class size of 21 to 22. And that's what I'm talking about for trade-offs, right? That one of the ways, right, to lower taxes and spend less on the schools is to have more kids in elementary school classrooms and to have fewer programs in the middle school and high school, right? That's what we spend most of that money on, right?
And my point is, but the number that you're using to calculate the class size is against the target number that we will ultimately get to. It's not the size of the classes that we would have for some foreseeable amount of time, because we haven't fully filled up the school with the 575 students.
Well, it's the same either way. I mean, right, it's the class size is whatever your target enrollment is. Let's say we're gonna split the difference and say we project somewhere between the current of 400 and the future of 575. We're gonna build a school for 500, which strikes me as just the wrong size, because it's almost always gonna be too big or too small. It's never gonna be just the right size. But let's say you did that, you'd still have the same question, right? So if you did it at 500, the number of classrooms you need to educate kids, if you have a class size target of 21, is gonna be twice as many classrooms as if your number is 40, whether your target is 500 or 400 or 575. So, I mean, if to your point, if the goal was just to say, let's get the most school we can get for $50 million, town contribution, maybe there's a way to do that within the MSBA, maybe there's not. I'm just saying, I always like to assume the worst case scenario for that side. So rather than take the rosiest assumption that we can get everything we want for less, which is the assumption some people like to take, well, we can get everything we want just for a lot less. I'm just assuming we can't get everything we want for less. So if the trade-off is going to be lower cost, lower town contribution, I'm just assuming for purposes of sort of not trying to put the best, not trying to make the rosiest assumption that you can't, right? Because if you could, then that's obviously makes it look better, right? You can get to a $65 million building and a $50 million town contribution. I haven't seen how we get there because of the size and enrollment requirement the MSBA has required us to accept.
So you're asked for perspective. You have it, probably enough. You probably have enough to go with for now.
So Gus, you're building to the budget process that you're suggesting that we do instead of building to the requirements of the MSB.
I am building.
Reminds me
yes.
of what happened 20 years ago. The original high school, which is now the middle school, has 8-foot wide corridors. You're not allowed to have 1,000 kids, like Medfield High School has grown to, in a school that has 8-foot wide corridors. So we could not, 20 years ago, we were not permitted to enlarge the existing high school because of the value engineering that had gone on when the school was built to build it to a lower cost, 8-foot wide corridors, and so then it limited what we could do later.
Yeah,
So I think
that's always the case, that when you can't afford everything you want down the road, you won't have as much as you would have had if you just decided to buy it. I'm making an argument that I do not hear any explicit consideration of what taxpayers can afford. Now, Mike's response was, I think most people can afford what we've got in mind. My perspective is exactly opposite of that. I think there's an increasing number of people in this town who cannot afford that.
I'll agree with that.
And that's
But the
driving a
problem,
change in the town, which is of concern to me.
the problem is that the schools cost what they cost. And you can't just arbitrarily take out 10, 15 million from it because you're gonna get a product that's not gonna work.
I disagree. Well, so that's, I don't think there's some universal law that says this is what a school has to cost. Because schools don't cost the same amount in all different towns. There's not some sort of a standard thing. Yeah, I mean.
And look, this is the question that I asked the other night, and you should continue to follow up on it, which is, what would it look like to get to that number?
Mhm.
And then people can decide, is that good enough? And my suspicion is, I think a majority of people would probably decide that it's not good enough based on what they want for the cost. But maybe they would, and maybe that would be fine, and then we revisit it at some point in the future. I mean, I just think that I don't think there's an easy answer that makes everybody happy, right? And so if we're gonna decide that cost is the main issue, then we may have to be out of the MSBA process. That's all I'm saying. Maybe not. Maybe there's a way you can get in there and get there, but I think some towns that have gotten to the point where you are, they do go their own way for that reason. So they can then say, all right, we're gonna take all this other stuff out of it, and we're not gonna build to those particular
If a year
requirements.
and a half ago you'd ever said that a $65 million school is saying that the cost is the main issue, I would have been.
Yeah, but I think as I mean, this is one of the issues, and I know this is not your case, but, I mean, you do have to put the numbers in context, right? So you can say, well, it's gonna be $500 million in capital assets over 100 years. And the question is, compared to what? Compared to the value that you're getting, compared to what it means, frankly, for the reputation of the school system and people's property values, because particularly for people who've been here for, well, no, but I think it's like any situation, you do have to put the numbers in context. It's a big number, and I do agree with you that as those numbers go up, but to me, the solution is looking down the line, how do you reduce the number of capital assets we have, not how do we skimp on them, right? How do you have 2 cars instead of 3 as opposed to having, what is it? Cadillac Escalade, is that what you're worried that we're buying? I don't know what that is, but.
Cadillac Escalade at the Taj Mahal.
Cadillac at the Taj Mahal, right.
Just to make I think this has been terrific, actually. It's because it gives a great perspective on differing, and really does capture the issues, because you represent the town, and so you hear it from all the voices. Pete, you and I, we were here 20 years ago, and it didn't pass but it's passed by the skin of its teeth, okay? And the first time it didn't pass, so it's a long story. So I have all the scars on my back from the history of what happened. But for the subsequent 20 years, every town meeting I went to, because I went to them all, thank God we got that school built and got that bond. So from a perspective, I'm sorry?
No one else has gotten 63% state reimbursement since
Oh, right,
then.
because we were at a timeline there that it was December, and January of '65 was going to go away. So I mean, but to the point, a couple of things. One is what we have here is a subcommittee. Okay, it's a subcommittee because I was the committee before, Sharon was the committee before me. All right, and we had a committee of one, which presented 2 issues in my particular case. One was there's too much to go around for one person, and the second one is you become labeled as one of them. And I think it's really important, to your point, Gus, that we are able to evaluate the process that this committee has gone through for the last 3 years. So I think it's an obligation on the part of the Warrant Committee to do that. Not to support what was done, but to evaluate, to analyze, to audit, and that's what we're going to do. I think I look back on your minutes, on the minutes in September, and your comments about your concern that was expressed, and I think appropriately and was dealt with, was, is there sufficient community participation, and the question on process. So, as I said, there's 4 of us here as a subcommittee. 2 are new, which is great because we have, clearer eyes from that perspective. But I also wanted to notice that we've already, through Sharon's, from Sharon's leadership, that we've got committees, every member of the warrant committee has some responsibility in going through. One was the MSBA process, another was site selection, another was sewer and water, one was park and rec, one is town planning, so one, and the most significant, financial review, which we're going to start, it's already started, but we'll continue, and traffic issues. So right now, each member, the 9 warrant committee members, have on this at least 2 to each one of those issues. Those are the issues that are the broad discussions, and from which we'll follow more. We have, as Sharon mentioned, we have tonight's meeting kicking it off. Tomorrow we have, for our kids, the pack that's supporting the Wheelock selection. Then we have a school committee meeting. We have the school building committee meeting, and we have the Dale at Dale advocate meeting. So, and those are intended to give us the baseline, which you've done a great job presenting right now, and then there'll be more, and which will jump off to these other subgroups. The intention is, and Sharon, you can go through the ultimate respect, is to come together, propose to the warrant committee, because our responsibility is going to have to be a vote up or down. And we will have a meeting where we'll compile this information, present it to ourselves, but it'll in a public forum, in which it'll be to be heard, so we won't vote on it at that, so we'll have it a week before, and the timing will be depending on what the article is presented and what the timing of that is. But my thought is that that's our responsibility as a warrant committee to address the issue that you've talked about. And I've been in 2 or 3 public forums where this question has come up. What's this going to cost? One is the final costs are just now being put together, and we're going to review that with the warrant, with Steve and I, and we're going to meet with Christine and Mike. So we've seen numbers, but we're going to go through that. As I've expressed on a number of occasions at these town forums, the warrant committee's responsibility is to look at this number in the total context of who can afford it, both in terms of who our taxpayers are now, what that base is, what the long-term cost of that's going to be, what the alternatives are. If we come down to that, we'll come back with a vote that will say can't afford it. But these processes, and Sharon's been very clear to us and to the warrant committee that this is a fact-based analysis. We need to separate as best we can. The emotions will be there, but it can't be part of what we do. So I think we recognize that. Provide the citizens of the town the information which they can make an informed decision. There's no right, wrong. It is what it is. That's what the town votes on. Again, I think it's an opportunity for us to address these questions. Yeah, we have 2 months. But I think one of the points that I think is really important, and we're going to look at that, is that the whole process, I hope, that will come through here is that it has been reviewed over the past 3 years. To everyone's satisfaction, perhaps notwithstanding, it has been reviewed, it has been presented, but as you well know better than I, the attention span of the average voter is pretty immediate. Right, and what our job is, I think, in the next 2 months, is to bring this together in a consolidated information package that will provide the electorate the information to make that decision.
That's a quick question.
While you're passing the microphone to your point, I just had a conversation yesterday with somebody here in town whose views I respect, and we had the conversation went like this: that the trick when you are in a committee like you're on, or even more than we are, is that on one hand, the most residents in town don't have the time to dig down into all this stuff to get everything that a committee has gone down into. And so there's a very interesting balance that you have to strike between, if you don't tell the public enough, they feel like they're being manipulated. If you tell them too much, their eyes glaze over and they just kind of can't hang with it. And there's this little sweet spot in the middle that basically has people saying, you've told me what it is I need to know in a way that I can understand it, that makes me feel comfortable that I know where we need to go. And it's a real trick to do that.
Well, there is, and I would say that point, that one thing I've learned, if I've learned anything as a member of the Warrant Committee, is, and I know you all share this, is the respect I have for the people who dedicate their time and volunteer their time in their committees. And I think that, we don't always agree with them, but we meet with all of them, and we'll discuss and challenge and the like. But I think in terms of the public presentation, it would be unfair, if that's the right word, I think it's the right word, it'd be unfair to put the school building committee and the people who have put this time into it to have to defend everything. So my objective in part is not to make them defend, make them support and explain in a fact-based way that we can stand up and go, wait a minute, we don't have that stake that they do. And that hopefully there's some fairness that we reflect in that.
I just have one question maybe for each of you. Just, there's been a lot of conversations over the last year or two. What's your view of the biggest misperception out there about this project? And if you don't want to answer now, you can get back to us. But like, what is it that what is it that you're frustrated with that people aren't getting, or that
For me, it's the fact that people think that the Dale Street site is big enough for it. It's clearly the people that know the most about it say the site's too small and we'll get a compromised building. I think there's a lot of misconception about the finances too. I think that's a close second. I mean, I've seen pictures that the Dale people have done where they've cut and pasted the Wheelock project and put it on the Dale Street site. But I mean, I'm relying on the people that are on the committee who build schools, who say that if you do that, you're going to get a compromised building. So
I think for me, it's a subtle answer here, Steve. The biggest misperception that I have, I think, or that I see, is people who think that the building committee and the school committee and the schools had an answer and then just purely manipulated a process to get to that answer. And the reason it's subtle is because I'll confess that before this ever came up, before we ever started this project, I sort of assumed that we were going to put the next school down at Wheelock because that's where the land was. Now, I wasn't in any cabal that did that. It's just that when you look at the logic of what the town had done and you looked at the logic, I didn't necessarily assume that the Dale Street School that we have wasn't going to be rebuilt or something, but I can't tell you where I formed the impression that the place for expansion for the schools was at Wheelock. And yet, somehow or another, I don't think it was just me thinking it through on my own. I think there was an undercurrent all along that kind of talked about that being a logical place for school. Now, what we're hearing is a rationale that says it's a logical place for a school, but the criticism is, oh, it was in the bag to start with. Nobody really thought about this stuff. And it's like, yeah, I actually think they did. There are other issues that are being raised that say, yeah, this is a harder decision than I was thinking, because I just kind of picked up on some flow of thought. But, I get mad when members of the public criticize a committee and attribute, they impugn the integrity of a committee because they don't like where the committee came out. And so that I'm particularly tuned into what I think of as a misperception around how the committee got there, Because I can even see, I had a predisposed notion that that's where it was going, and I had nothing to do with any of the process before it ever started up.
Yeah, I guess it's hard to separate sort of, I don't know how representative the communications I get are. And I think sometimes, people write for effect rather necessarily than persuasion. I do think there are misperceptions on the cost issues. I think there's always a misperception, I think, with any project that you do, that there's sort of a simple solution that's cheaper, that gets you everything that you want, that people just didn't consider the obvious, simple, cheaper answer. And I think to our discussion earlier, there's always going to be a trade-off here, and people are going to come out in a different place on how you weigh those trade-offs. And people have all sorts of different reasons for why they hold a view that they do. and I think in the process, try to I think come up with arguments they think are persuasive to other people, which may or may not matter to them. And I think that we've all kind of adopted, and maybe this has always been true throughout human history, but we've sort of all kind of absorbed almost a lawyerly approach or a political consultant approach even to how we communicate. And I think certainly social media encourages it, where you're sort of writing for an audience and trying to come up with an argument that other people are going to be persuaded by, but may or may not be why you're there. I remember this. I can't remember which one it was. It was either one of the housing projects or something else, and someone had come up with a kind of a lengthy argument, and I can't remember what it was about, but it had some esoteric animal species that was going to be affected by this, and and I just had to say at the end, isn't the real objection here is you don't want this built behind your house? And they said yes. And so what I have tried to do through this process is at least for myself, to avoid doing that, to kind of tell you, here's what I was really persuaded by, here's what I really think, this is why I think what I think. And so I think that creeps into this a little bit, that everybody's kind of looking for something that's gonna, get the result they want, right? In the sense that I don't want it there for whatever reason. I don't want it there because it's in my neighborhood. I don't want it there because I like this. I don't want it there for, and any of those things are perfectly legitimate, right? There's nothing illegitimate about that at all.
We're all playing pool with sledgehammers.
Well, I think that can kind of obscure some of the issues when there's this effort to try to piece together the arguments that'll persuade enough people to get you the outcome that you want. And I'm going to do my best to avoid that and just try to say, here's why I think what I think, and here's why it is. So I think that some of the misperceptions creep in on that process, where so you can always, you can pick a nit at anything, right? And obviously the proposal that's being put forward by the school building committee is sort of in the spotlight because that's the proposal that's there. And so it's always easy to sort of focus on what's right in front of you, and rather than the negatives that might apply to the alternatives. And so it's hard to do. It's hard to say we're going to evaluate this in something of a vacuum, but also evaluate all the alternatives. I think to Gus's point, I think we do have to explain and why the choices were made that we made, and what alternatives were considered, what were possible, which ones weren't possible, why we did what we did, and that's part of it. I guess I think that the sweet spot for the amount of information might be a little wider than you think it is. I do think in a lot of areas that I think what you're all doing is the right thing to do, to try to sort through the various competing claims to come up with a set of facts that we can all agree on, and then I think people can make their judgment about where those facts lead them, what it leads them to conclude about this particular project. So I commend you for doing that. But
So I have a slightly different thought on the amount of information that we should be giving to the residents. I think we should be giving all the information to the residents, not sort of a sweet spot result. I think that in addition to giving them that, I think the school building committee has an incredibly robust website that has all the data on it. In addition to the data, I think that we need to be giving them our opinions as to what, because we've probably digested more of, I regard one of my roles as trying to digest the information, make a determination, and then give an opinion to the residents.
Yeah.
So.
Just to that point, and I couldn't agree more, that the information is all available now, as you know. The question that comes in is it credible? So we're not going to try and take the information and spin it in any different way. I think what we're really intending to do is take the information that's available and address the salient points, if that's what it is, in the process and in the arguments pro or con against it, because that's why we have all these different groups, so that at least people can say, yes, this is it, go to page 1126, and you will see what the MSBA requires, and then someone said, well, who are the MSBA? And we'll just say, okay, alternatively, if you don't have an MSBA or something of that nature. But I couldn't agree with you more, Pete. We're not gonna try and, spin it down to anything other than to say, yeah, this is where you go, and this is where you can get the information, and from our perspective, it's valid for you to rely on that information.
And Pete, I'd agree with you. I didn't mean to imply that people don't have access to all the data that they want. I was really picturing when everyone shows up at a town meeting and is being asked to vote on an important issue like this. Ideally, you would like at least the vast majority of people in the room to be informed, however they choose to vote. So the sweet spot is how much time and effort does a committee, like in this case, the building committee, my experience, it was when I first got here and it was the ALS study committee, how much time do you take to explain to those people who have the interest to want, who don't understand it but want to learn? How do you decide what you're going to explain? How far down into the depths do you bring them? But certainly, to your point, Pete, all the data should be there for people to dig as deep as they want.
Not in the interest of making your meeting any longer than it necessarily needs to be. I just wanted to ask more of like a general process question, because I do think that there is some confusion out there already as to what exactly we're going to be voting on at the town meeting. So I thought it would be helpful just to not necessarily have a very, very long discussion about it, but I have heard some people say that they think when they're coming to town meeting that they're going to be choosing between Wheelock and Dale, and I would like to just kind of confirm what you as selectmen who are going to be determining the warrant, what exactly people are going to be voting on. And then I know the answer to that question, but I just wanted to put that out there. And then I would, as a subset to that, if it passes, clearly the school moves forward and things goes on. But then what then is the process if it fails? So I don't know which one of you want to take that.
Well, I mean, I think the article will be an up or down vote on the building as proposed, as is typically the case. I think that's what the warrant article will be. I think as to what happens if it fails, I think to Bob's bit of history before, I think it depends, right? If it fails by 2 votes, then you have an option to revote it. I think if it fails clearly, I think then we're somewhat back to the drawing board, right? I don't think it's as simple as saying, well, we'll go build the new building at Dale, because I think to the cost point, Gus, if the cost is dispositive, I don't think we're going to get this exact same building for $15 million left by building it someplace else, right? I think you could probably agree with that.
Yeah.
So we're going to have a series of trade-offs at that point, and I think I think it's a longer discussion than simply redesigning another building in a different location and putting it there. In terms of the trade-off between, all right, from the Band-Aid approach, we decided to do a Band-Aid approach in the building and say, what does it cost to get us another 10, 15 years out of what we have now, and then we revisit at that point. That's one potential alternative. And then you could look at, all right, to your point, if the conclusion is it was just too expensive, what does it look like to get a building that's under whatever the number is that we decide is the affordable amount? And then is it worth it to spend that, right? I mean, because part of it is, let's say you got to a $50 million town contribution, but, if the $50 million bill, for whatever reason, putting us, all the educational program, and I can't speak to the details of the educational program, but that's a judgment for the school committee to make. But if you got to, for 50% of the educational program for 80% of the cost, is that really worth it? As opposed to getting to, again, this is called faux precision. You can't actually measure 50% of an educational program, but so I'm using faux precision Just like when we get these construction estimates, that's like $58,178,348. Like, oh, tremendous. What an accurate, clearly like precise job that person has done. So it's faux precision, but I think that's part of it too. In other words, with the Band-Aid for 10% of the cost gets you 48% of the educational program. Maybe that's the way to go. So I think it's a longer discussion at that point, based on where everybody lands and what else happens. So I don't think it's as simple as saying, well, then we're just going to immediately pivot. All right, let's just build. The only issue was the site, and so we're going to pivot to the other location. Because if it's cost, that's a much broader discussion, and to me, I think in some ways it's an educational policy discussion and what that building looks like, and that's where I'm both out of my official position and that I've got no role there, and out of my depth in terms of it being an educator to say what would the education program look like in a building for that amount of money.
Mike, can I ask a question? I'm going to ask Mike this question to share a perception, and this is more either.
See, Sharon, you are making the meeting longer than it needs to be.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's right. But in that Sharon started this for her, in a way, she asked questions. She asked a question she knew the answer to because she wanted the public to hear the answer. I'm asking the same question, but I'm not sure. I think I know the answer to it, but I'm going to let Mike publicly embarrass me by being wrong and with no hard feelings. Right over the last 6 months, there has been an ongoing clamor for the building committee to revisit the site decision. And my understanding, and what it is the town is between a rock and a hard place in doing that. MSBA funded us to conduct a site feasibility study. The results of that site feasibility study said the Wheelock site was the best study. The argument being made by the Dale at Dale folks, as I picked up on it, is, well, but now's the time that you could revisit the feasibility of the site and redo that and rethink it, and possibly we think you'll get to a different decision, and that would not derail the entire MSBA process. The problem with that is there is no money to do that second repeat feasibility study. So as a practical matter, there's no money to do it now. So you'd have to make a decision that because a significant number of people don't like the Wheelock site, we would throw out or walk away from the analysis that has been done by the building committee, delay this whole process by at least one funding cycle, assuming that the town approves another $600,000, $750,000 a year to redo this. And then you could then come back and look at those two feasibility studies, and you would still have to figure out which one to go with. And so as I perceive the process, the difficulty, even if that was the right thing to do, is that there's no way to do that because there's no funding to do it and keep on the track that we're on. So it's kind of like you have to play this out. That's my perception.
Well, I'll correct a couple of things. I mean, the building committee did take up the article from the town meeting, and the view of the committee was not to change the location. So it's not the feasibility study that would have to be redone. I think that the request was really to switch and go back to it and essentially conclude that the feasibility study.
So you're saying the committee could have just taken that study and rejiggered all of their analysis?
The study, yes. The additional building design, no. So from the time the site selection was made in November, there's been a bunch more work done on the building at Elm Street. And so that part of it would have to be redone. So it's not the full amount of the process. But all the pros and cons, you could go back to the pros and cons as they were laid out last fall. Those facts are still the facts.
Right,
And you could just say, we're going to weigh those facts differently, either as a pragmatic matter, say, for whatever reason, we still think Wheelock is a better option, but it's never going to pass, and so we're going to pick the suboptimal option. You could have done that, and then you would have had to come up with money from someplace to pay for that additional design work. So there would have been an additional amount of work done, but there was the committee did not change its mind, I think is about the site piece of it. But you would have, if the committee had changed its mind, we would have had to figure out how to pay for that. Really, it's that from the December to the work that was done since December. So you wouldn't be throwing out the work that had been done through the site selection decision. You'd have to, because it's not, you couldn't just, again, take the same building, plop it on the same location. Some of it would have been useful. I mean, it would not have been all wasted. I mean, there's certain systems issues and all the rest of it. But I think you'd have to look back again, for example, for the net zero piece of it. You have to look at the ground study. There's all sorts of stuff that you have to do.
But I think the bottom line from your answer is that if it fails and you need to, the decision is made by the school committee, by the whomever has to decide next to keep it going, there would have to be an article at a future town meeting to allot more money to redo the piece that has to be redone. But we just don't know what that dollar amount is,
And
correct?
Mike, your comment's interesting, because right now, the assumption is if it fails over site selection, which doesn't necessarily give us feedback on the
Yeah,
acceptability.
I'm not
of cost.
assuming that if it fails over six. I mean, I think the debate that has happened
Okay.
is not, I don't think, I mean, it's happening, I think the view that a building, an $80 million building at Dale passes easily, whereas an $80 million building at Dale Wheelock fails, I don't think that's correct.
Okay.
I think there's plenty of people, including you, who would be against the $80 million building at either location,
Right.
right? And so I think, and the assumption that everybody who would vote yes or prefers the Wheelock site would automatically vote yes, I don't think that's, I think
Okay.
trying to play that out from the public opinion polling without real public opinion polling and people having different views, and my own naive view that people are subject to persuasion one way or the other. I think I don't think we should make it, I think I said this in SBC, we have to make a substantive decision. We can't just try to play it out saying this is easy, that's not, because you're gonna be wrong so often trying to play that game. And so yeah, I mean, you could have, we could have switched sites, the committee is not persuaded by, was not persuaded by the article and all of that. So,
I think that if it's voted down at town meeting, given the fact that the select board has voted unanimously to cite it there, the school building committee voted unanimously to cite it there, the school committee voted unanimously to cite it there. I don't know if the warrant committee weighed in on it. I think that the town might be looking for whole new leadership on those three boards, basically. I'm not sure the school building committee has signed up to go through this process again. If it were voted down, we might lose a lot of town leadership.
maybe. I think we have to see.
They could be having a lot of fun just sitting in meetings like all of us, and they might want to still do it, because
Yeah, I think we have to see, what the grounds are, what happens, there's a lot of uncertainty around it. It's been certainly the strangest period of time, and definitely the strangest period of time to consider a project like this.
Right.
And so I think a lot of the assumptions we might make about, based on our experience in the past, that I'm not sure that would necessarily be true, for good or for ill, given the way, unfortunately, things have been and are continuing, sadly. So I think that's just the reality of where we are.
okay. I won't ask you another question that will make it go any longer. We have another joint meeting September 28th, so
Yeah,
until
we're talking
then.
about the budget.
That's right.
The budget will have you, we should have updated policies for them by then, right? Or updated financial policies by then, by September 28th.
September 28th.
We are working towards that date. We're just waiting to get through our Moody's review
Okay.
on the 2nd.
September 2nd.
September 2nd.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
All right,
Thank
anything
you.
else from?
No, thank you.
Keep up the good work.
Okay, all
You
right,
can
thank
see
you.
why Bill comes to all of these meetings,
Because they're fun.
right? I mean, yeah.
Threatened his reserve chair earlier, so. he's not
Okay.
here tonight.
I'm not
All
leaving,
right.
I'm just here all night.
Maybe you want the,
No.
For the two new members of the warrant committee, when I first joined the warrant committee, I was told that really, the committee doesn't really start its work until like late November, early December, and it's over by April. And I haven't seen that for years.
My only advice is if you see a message from Scott McDermott, don't answer. Thanks a lot.
All right.
Have a good
Nice to
night.
see you.
Thanks for
Thank you,
coming.
everybody.
Thank you for coming.
Take care.
All right, let's see.
Get left.
What do we have left? Back to the, if I can find my agenda.
Policies on.
Oh, yeah, the proposed policy on flag signage and displays on town policy. That was in the packet.
In your packet for review, you had asked me earlier this spring to start looking at what other towns were doing regarding flag signage and displays. Mark has reviewed this. I would anticipate that because we're just introducing it tonight, it was just in the packet, you would take the time to review it and we can have a lengthier discussion on the 14th.
Okay.
But free, happy to discuss it tonight as well.
I mean, this is another, I think, codification policy.
Yes, we're
That this
trying
is
to
what we've done,
formalize-
this is what we've always done.
Yeah.
But I think we've tried to move away over the last several years from the sort of lore and folklore of the procedural and policy folklore of Medfield towards something that,
You get one answer.
you get an answer, here's what it is.
Versus three different
So, yeah.
My office one.
Ironically, today, I had a question about a flag in town that Christine took care of solving, so
There you go.
Yeah, well, I thought I solved it.
she worked on it.
I worked on it. I was convinced it was Cumberland Farms flag, but it is not. It's Memo's flag, so I have to talk to Russ Hallis
Oh.
about
I
it.
see.
Yep.
Great.
That's not the one over the street, is it?
No.
That was all wrapped up, I could barely make
yeah,
out what it was.
Down by Cumberland Farms, it's apparently
the
tattered.
American flags that are lining Main Street
Oh, yeah.
have become tattered in the last few storms. So I
got
reached
it.
out to Memo to
Yep.
address it.
Okay.
So do you have any comments on these guys?
First, I'm happy to talk about it on the 14th. The reaction, I think, the main reaction that I had was only in light of, Mark, I don't yet completely grasp the care, custody, and control nuance in terms of what we as a Board of Selectmen do control and what other departments in possession of town property might control. So when I looked at the second page of this that talked about unattended signage, displays, or other structures not owned and installed by the town or prohibited on town property under the jurisdiction or control of the Board of Selectmen, I think this policy only relates to town property under the control of the selectmen. This is not a policy for all town property. Am I reading that right?
This is what we control. Right.
What you control. I know what Gus talking about, for example, the library has deeded care, custody, and control of their building. They control their staff. This would not apply. Although I did mention the library in here, the library would have their own policy on what they want to do for.
So that's what I wanted. So some of the issues that are of concern, this policy is not going to address them at all.
Not unless we talk to Mark more about your definition of care, custody, and
Okay.
control.
So in advance of our, Mark, for your benefit, in advance of our conversation, the question in my mind is whether the assignment of town property to a particular town organization, be it the library or a department, for a specific purpose, appears to me, with this care, custody, and control issue, to basically hand sovereignty over that property to whoever it was given to for all purposes or any purposes that they see fit. And I'm looking for the constraint on how, how an agency of the town that does have care, custody, and control, I'm basically asking the question, are there any, once they have it, are there any limits at all on how they use it other than what their own internal governance body might choose to impose?
The short answer is no. And again, the resolution would be a more detailed or specific charter provision. It's one more example of the fact that you're operating with a bare bones governmental structure as far as what exists on the books, if you will. There's statutorily, it's a default situation that the care, custody, and control is in all aspects of that are with whoever the property is, whether it's the COA or it's the Park and Rec or the library, whatever. You have property either specifically under your control or by default because nobody else does. But you don't have any overlapping authority to reach out to town-wide. It simply is nothing you can rely upon statutorily or charter-wise to justify that position.
Okay, so I'm only pointing out that the scope of this policy is fairly restricted
Correct.
under the current charter, and that's just something the three of us should be aware of. And then the only other question that occurred to me, which was of lesser significance, was we had talked in that early discussion we had a couple of, a month ago, that maybe it doesn't matter because some of the places we were talking about public, the issue was if a private organization wants a town department to promote an activity that that private organization is, supporting or is running, I don't think it certainly wouldn't have been my intent to have put in restrictions on the ability for town departments, probably appropriate town departments, given the nature of the activity, to be able to make that information available to the public. So whether that's a designated bulletin board or something like that, I was reading this with an eye to making sure that we had in fact left open the possibility that private organizations could in fact promote their activities appropriately by, using town property. I don't think, it certainly wasn't my intent to prevent that from happening.
Are you talking in terms of the sandwich board signs that we do?
It could be sandwich board sign. I mean, the issue that came up, I think, was the announcement of it was the treasure hunt or something that was done in May by Medfield together, that there was, I think the library promoted it, Parks and Rec did not. And because of some discussions we've had, I know why Parks and Rec didn't, but it, on the surface, it doesn't seem like it's anybody's intent to not allow an organization trying to do something good in town from being able to let people know that it's trying to do it. It's just a question of what's the appropriate way. I don't think it's explicit in here, but at least there's nothing in here that I read that would have precluded that kind of, public announcement by a private group.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, I can address that in that the focus, rather than being on whether signage in and of itself is permissible, whether attended or unattended, the focus was whether or not there are permissible town events.
Yep.
And it's an adjunct of that. So that's,
Okay.
it comes around indirectly in that regard. If the activity is allowed and there's some kind of signage connected with it, then it's arguably permissible.
Okay.
But the signage in and of by itself is restricted. And the other thing I would note as an observation, notwithstanding the technical legal authority over various properties, the overall potential liability to the town remains the same, and it would make sense for every board and commission that has care, custody, and control of property to frankly get on the same page and have a consistent policy.
Mm-hmm. And Mark, I assume that an allowed activity by the town doesn't automatically convey a by right authorization to put signs up. It's one thing to allow signs, but the signs would still have to be approved. Let me give you an example. Let's say cyclocross comes back next year at the beginning, and rather than merely, kind of quietly promoting it, they basically want signs throughout all of the town promoting cyclocross at the state hospital. There must be some way the town can place a control that, limit that.
You don't allow that. You only allow that at the designated locations that you approved in your signage policy, your
Okay.
sandwich board policy.
Okay.
Yeah.
But
And
they could
otherwise,
do it there.
any event or exhibition, what have you, that came before you for permitting, you could address that as well.
Well,
For
my
instance,
real
we've had-
question is, is that, given this structure that we can have signs for town-approved events?
Yes.
Does that eliminate the need for an organization running that event to request approval of the sign, but that the sign approval just comes as part of the approval of the event itself?
No, because some of the events you don't approve.
No,
you
but
don't-
if we approve the event, does that automatically come with an approval of the signs?
I would say it's part of the process,
Yeah,
and
it's
I would
only
not
when
say
they
it's
ask for it.
automatic.
Yeah.
Just as an example, we've had in the early days of Pan Mass, where they would come in individual towns and get permission to pass through,
Mm-hmm.
signage was very much an issue with that. And that was something that prior boards were somewhat proactive about.
Just to push the point harder though, Christine,
I know
yes,
what
if
you're
they ask. So if they do ask, is it actually a decision for us to make on whether to approve it? Or because they asked and it was an approved event, the approval comes with the mere request?
No, I think the approval comes separately under your sandwich board policy. You set parameters on where they can put the signs and
Sure.
when and how. So I
But
think it's a
within
separate
that-
application.
But so if we had 35 events in town and the sandwich board policy says they can only be here, here, and here, we basically could have 35 sandwich boards at a particular location because the sandwich board policy allows it.
No, I think a better example is like Medfield Day, which is approved, and within the area approved for Medfield Day, people can have signage
Okay.
as an accessory to that activity.
That's not clear to me in this policy as worded right now.
Well, it's the distinction between unattended and attended signage.
Yeah.
So how would this policy deal with the request that the Medfield Coalition for Suicide Prevention made to illuminate town buildings?
I think it would fall under, you'd have to make a decision whether or not it was allowed, and you decided last time that you did not want to do that.
Right, but I don't know that it's addressed here.
You would
Well-
be unattended.
It'd be an unattended
It
display.
would be unattended.
And it says it's prohibited.
Yeah.
So it wouldn't be, so the answer to your question, Pete, is you couldn't do it on
Yeah.
town hall.
And the problem is, in each of these categories, unfortunately, you can't cherry pick. Once you
Right.
allow one form of communication, it's open to anybody.
Mhm.
And unfortunately, it could end up being something, there's certainly issues and movements that get 100% support, but then there's all the fringe stuff too. And that comes along with it if you allow something that's overwhelmingly supported.
Mm-hmm.
Mark, what do we do with the memo banners?
You approve them as signage when they come in and ask for their Medfield Day, memo day permit.
But they're basically unattended signage that's prohibited.
That's in the
It's not
public
town
way, though,
property,
and it's in the public way.
All right.
Right, and the public way is not addressed by this.
Mm-hmm. Okay,
Anything else on that?
that's all for now.
All right, let's see, what's next? Vote to authorize me to sign the Mass School Building Authority's design enrollment certification for the elementary school project for 575 students. This is the amount we agreed to at the outset of this process, and it's the size of the building that was designed. It's clearly written, it was kind of,
See, I was all set to approve this until we had this conversation.
well, I was chuckling at this, that you read it clearly, their concern is that we're gonna sue them to make a bigger building.
Right.
Right, and clearly that's the concern, so we're agreeing we're not gonna sue them for a bigger building. Can you agree on that?
I think we can.
Do we have a motion then?
Let's see, I move that we, wait a minute, I gotta get the right one. I move that we authorize the chair to sign the Massachusetts School Building Authority's design enrollment certification for the Dale Street Elementary School project for 575 students in grades 4 through 5.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right. We did Bill Cook and Michael Mancini as Inspector of Wires. Vote to authorize access to the Hinckley South property by Midfield Holdings LLC for site inspections and testing.
So Mr. Borelli would like to go on and do some soil testing. So you just need to vote to authorize him to access the property, and I would like you to authorize me to sign a license agreement with him.
Access the
so that we
property.
have that in place.
I don't think you have to leave the table, Pete, if you're recused.
I am going to recuse myself.
Okay, but here, we'll just, Gus, do we have a motion?
Yeah. All right, I move that we authorize Bob Borelli access to the Hinckley South property, or we authorize access to the Hinckley South property by Medfield Holdings LLC for site inspections and testing, and that we authorize the town administrator to sign a license agreement in conjunction with that authorization.
Aye, second. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? All right. Next, to authorize the town administrator to sign a license agreement for the use of MSH October 26th and 27th for a state police military training exercise. This is going to be in the buildings?
This will be in the buildings. This is training they've done in the past. Unfortunately, it's highly classified, and we're not allowed to say what the actual training is, but they've done it in the past, and they've worked with Lars Anderson, who's been coordinating all of this.
Will the site be closed those days?
They're doing it inside. They don't believe they'll need to.
Okay. We have a motion?
The Ghostbusters unit. I move that we authorize the town administrator to sign a license agreement for use of the Medfield State Hospital, October 26th and 27th, for state police military training exercise.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Yes.
Opposed? All right, consent agenda, Coolidge Corner Theater request use of Medfield State Hospital for the following dates, October 15th and October 16th for Night of the Living Dead and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Is this a second weekend? So, I think we approved this.
You talked about it, and there was some concern. They were going to show One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
We didn't vote, we deferred.
So you didn't vote, you deferred it.
We did defer both?
We deferred both, yeah.
Yeah.
I thought we did.
Yeah.
Yeah, we deferred, okay.
And
okay.
they had already reached out to me. I wasn't here the day of your last meeting. They had already reached out to me that they were going to not show that anyway, so they thought about it as well.
Good call.
Okay.
Is this a kids matinee?
Yes, this is during the day, afternoon. This is perfect, Bill. You must love both of these movies.
I don't care if Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Really? You don't have a Leatherface among your displays?
No,
Oh.
and I don't like places or shows where it's okay to kill zombies.
Ah.
Not because I care about the zombies, but I mean, it's a way to sneak in violence that doesn't, you don't need to see.
There you go. All right. Good to know. You okay with these movies, though? We can show these movies?
Oh, yeah.
You have a motion, Gus?
I move that we approve Coolidge Corner Theater's request to use the Medfield State Hospital on Friday, October 15th and Saturday, October 16th to show The Night of the Living Dead and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? And the request from Medfield Outreach to place flyers at Medfield State Hospital, I assume, not MHS, for September suicide prevention
Yes.
awareness and October substance abuse prevention. Do you have
They
a
already
motion?
have permission for MSC.
Yeah.
For MHS.
Do you have a motion, Gus?
I move that we approve Medfield Outreach's request for permission to place flyers at the Medfield State Hospital in September for suicide prevention awareness and in the month of October for substance abuse prevention.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right. Meeting minutes, none.
I have none to give you
We
this week.
approved so many the last time. Good for us. Well done by
Ms.
us.
Kalivas, who's been doing our minutes over the summer, just went back to college, so.
Good boy.
But however,
Back in
we
the hole.
did advertise last night for a recording clerk for the Board of Selectmen. It's a remote position. It pays $125 per meeting set. And we've
By
already
the
started.
hour. That's good.
We've started, yeah, tonight's not a good example. We've
Only
already started.
requirement is you're not allowed to watch any meetings before you take this job. Don't ask the Medfield TV people what it's like to be here for these meetings.
Don't post this one for like a week.
No, we're wonderful.
She wants to be
Wonderful.
remote, too.
And
Town administrator,
yep.
town
Oh.
administrator updates.
I just have one for you, just a reminder that it is Goonies this weekend up at the Medfield State Hospital, and we have a very low turnout of tickets. I think it's because it's the last weekend before school starts, but there are plenty of tickets available if anybody is interested in going to see it.
Friday and Saturday?
Friday and Saturday.
Friday and Saturday, Goonies.
Yep.
A American classic. All right. Next meeting dates, September 14th, 21st, and 28th with the Warrant Committee. Do we have, before we get to selecting reports, do we have the Daniels and Pond folks scheduled for one of these, or what's the
So
status?
they are going to come in on September 14th.
September 14th, okay.
And then based on, we're putting together the schedule for September, October, and November. We may be able to push your September 21st meeting off, so you're not meeting 3 weeks in a row, but I'll let you know
All right.
once it balances out.
We have that, if we're gonna have a nice solid break here, we're gonna be coming.
You're gonna be ready to go 3
Yeah.
weeks in a row?
But I will say, the 21st, I am supposed to be in court in New York on the 21st. I'm skeptical that I'll still be
Okay.
in an in-person appearance that day, but I should be able to make it back in time. But if not, I can zoom in.
Okay.
That's why I need to put my giant
For-
melon
yeah,
up there.
that's-
And
For
I
Mark.
need to get the wide screen, the double wide screen, if you're gonna put my head up there, but.
All right, well, pencil the 21st in, and then when we finalize the schedule this week, we'll let you know if we need it.
All right, selectmen reports. Pete?
So there was a meeting of the Town of Medfield Climate Action Plan Group that presented here tonight, Hilly's group, and I attended that. MCAP had a meeting as well and put forward their plans. I was also at the Medfield Foundation's Legacy Fund grant-making subgroup, and then I've had some conversations with the Medfield Food Cupboard. They're going to be coming to us soon. That's it.
The State Hospital Development Committee is right in the middle of the interviewing process for the two developers that submitted proposals for redevelopment of the State Hospital. So we had our, it was an hour and a half call, it was Zoom meeting with, Zoom meeting with Trinity Financial last Monday night. I thought that was a good meeting. We didn't have time to answer all of the questions, and I haven't even seen all the questions that came in through the public, but it was a constructive meeting. Speaking personally, I was happy with the tone of the conversation in both directions. I think they at least, I think there would be a developer that we would be able to work with.
I would just second that, Gus. I thought that they were very open to changes, too.
Yeah,
So I thought that was
it's at an
very,
early
very
right.
helpful. They basically want to do what the town wants to do.
Right. It's at an early stage in that process. The one issue that I think we should put on the radar screen for us just to be thinking about, and Christine I know has already been involved, but gotten the heads up. In that proposal, one of the caveats they had at the front, you might recall, was the issue around the gun range. And I don't know exactly what the solution to that will be, but I actually anticipate that the town will probably, at least if we go in the direction of Trinity and quite possibly either developer, that the town will have to figure out some way to take the lead on pushing that issue to some kind of a resolution. They had their own acoustic engineer take a look at what could be done. The results of that were that you could, in fact, probably put up acoustic walls, but they'd have to be on the sides. They'd have to go partway down range, 30 feet high, and they've done some acoustic testing, so they've got the maps. Or you'd have to, and this is assuming that the range stays there, which my guess is it'll be hard for it not to, but or to enclose the range, and so. The questions around cost and who pays and what's involved there, given that in addition to the town, a lot of police departments in the area use it, I think, to include the state police.
Mm-hmm.
So there are a lot of interested parties that would suggest to me there might be a diverse set of sources of funding if we have to do something that's of significant cost. That was presented in this proposal as kind of a go, no-go. But when I asked them about it, the response I got back was, we're willing to talk, and every question we had that was an issue was that we're willing to talk, and they sounded sincere. But that's an issue that we're going to have to tackle sooner rather than later if we do move ahead, at least with them and possibly with both. The second one, Pulte Homes, their call in the Zoom meeting is tomorrow night.
I actually think that the gun range issue is not a go, no-go issue for Trinity. I think it's sort of a red herring. As a neighbor, I hear it all the time, and it's like when I lived next to Brigham and Women's Hospital, I didn't hear the ambulances by the time I moved out of Mission Hill. So the gun range doesn't bother me.
They're going to have other issues. They're going to have the 7-year construction period for the Cultural Arts Center right in the middle of their project, too, so.
They, Bill, my impression of their
Would you like to have a
proposal-
microphone? No.
So for anyone on Medfield TV that didn't hear that quiet comment from the back of the room, the idea
The
that.
gentleman didn't identify himself.
Who didn't identify himself, and I really am not sure who he is, but I think his first name is Bill and his last name is Massaro. The comment was that the Cultural and Arts Center will be in the middle of a 7-year construction process while they're trying to develop their own things. Bill, my sense on that, in the way they structured the proposal to include a contribution.
I'm just saying the noise from a construction is certainly not
Oh.
going to be any worse than the intermittent
okay.
noise from a range
Uh,
once a week.
So I'm not as sanguine about the idea that issue is going to go away for them as Pete suggested, or you maybe are. My point was, my point,
It's a negotiation point.
yeah, and I can see that we sort of own a lead action on that. What I was going to say is that the thing that struck me in their proposal, they didn't say it, but my sense is that they are seeing the Culture and Arts Center as actually a positive asset to their own market.
I mean, that's
Yeah,
what they
yeah.
do, so that's understandable.
Yeah, but I mean, it shows up as an amenity that.
I'd be more worried about due diligence and the
Yeah,
impact,
yeah,
there on the
yeah.
proposal.
Yeah, okay. That's it.
Anything else? And the one update I had, suggests to me that we're gonna have to keep September 21st, Christine, because I had a nice chat with the town's planning consultant who's working on the update to the housing production plan.
We want to come out
In
with
her
that
view, I
first.
think her expectation is that the meeting on the reauthorization of the housing production plan is the 21st with the planning board and the Affordable Housing Trust. So, and again, I'm perfectly happy to meet that night as well. And whether I'm Zooming or here,
No,
but.
we can,
I did it, yeah, just to let everyone know, that's coming down the pike. Our reauthorization is due in October. It's hard to believe it's been 5 years. It's up for renewal, and she's in the process of collecting comments and putting it together. And so we'll have that to look forward to. And I think that's all that I had. So if there's nothing else, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
I move that we adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, right. See everybody next time.
See?